Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Mr. Storyteller. Before you dive into tonight's nightmare, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now, get comfortable and relax.
The autumn wind raked through the barren trees as Marisol drove down the lonely, cracked highway. Behind her, the radio whispered, static interlaced with unsettling, half-formed sentences that sounded uncannily like a lullaby for the damned. The headline on the newspaper fluttering across her lap read, "True Scary Stories to Fall Asleep." And suddenly, every eerie tale she once dismissed as urban legend took on a weight of reality. The very air around her felt laden with foreboding secrets, and she couldn't shake the sense that she was being led somewhere by an unseen hand. Marisol's destination was the dilapidated ancestral home of her late grandmother, a sprawling manor in the middle of nowhere, its stone facade cloaked in ivy and mystery. Tales of ghosts and tortured souls haunted her childhood, passed along by whispered warnings and midnight confessions. Though she had returned to settle her grandmother's affairs, she now sensed that the mansion was alive with more than mere memories. As she stepped out of her car, a shiver crawled up her spine. The gate creaked open with reluctant protest as if it remembered every agonizing moment it had witnessed. Inside the grand foyer, dust motes danced in the beams of moonlight, revealing the decay of what once had been opulent beauty. Marisol's footsteps echoed down the hallway, each thud a slow drumbeat heralding the impending dread. The silence was punctured only by the intermittent drip of water from a broken pipe, a reminder of time's relentless decay. Exploring the upper chambers, she discovered a room lined with shelves overflowing with aged books. Their titles ranged from folklore to obscure accounts of paranormal events. In the center, on a heavy oak desk, lay an open journal. The faded ink detailed the confessions of her grandmother, a woman who believed she was continuously haunted by something that defied explanation. It described ghostly whispers, moving shadows, and terrifying encounters that blurred the line between the natural and the supernatural. Marisol felt compelled to speak aloud to the vacant space. "Grandma, were you afraid?" she murmured, her voice trembling. The silence that answered was oppressive, but then, from somewhere behind the long corridor came a low, guttural chuckle. It was as though the walls themselves were replying. "No, dear," an indistinct voice whispered. "I was just never alone." Her heart raced as she listened, aware that the tone brimmed with sinister amusement. The voice carried the weight of despair and malice, like a ghost who had practiced cruelty for centuries. Marisol's logical mind recoiled, yet her instincts urged her to confront whatever haunted this forsaken place. Clutching the journal, she ventured deeper into the labyrinthine corridors of the mansion. In the parlor room, an antique mirror stood like a frozen sentinel amidst shattered relics of a bygone era. The reflection it offered was not entirely her own. An indistinct silhouette moved behind her, as if waiting for her to acknowledge its existence. "Who's there?" Marisol demanded, her voice echoing off the walls. The answer was not immediate. When it came, it was a raspy, feverish whisper that drew her eyes to the mirror. "We come to share your dreams, to lull you into oblivion." The words sent a fresh spike of terror through her veins. Heart pounding, she turned toward the window, only to find nothing but the suffocating darkness of the overgrown grounds. Every instinct screamed for her to flee, but curiosity, a trait as ancient as the horrors it often summons, held her captive. She sat before the mirror, determined to decipher its cryptic message. The ghostly entity's eyes seemed to flicker within the reflective surface, urging her silently to unlock the manor's terrible secrets. Night deepened, and the manor came alive with ghostly recollections. The atmosphere grew dense, suffused with memories of long-gone merriment twisted into haunting echoes. Far off, in what looked like a long-abandoned nursery, soft, childlike humming drew Marisol into a state of disoriented reverie. There, a faded rocking horse moved ever so slightly back and forth on its own. The lullaby it carried was an eerie, out-of-tune rendition of a forgotten lullaby that once soothed infants to sleep. The melody, layered with dissonance and melancholy, soon evolved into a chorus of frightened whispers. A sudden knock shattered the stillness of the nursery. "Is someone there?" Marisol called out, her voice barely contained fear. A child's faint giggle answered, a sound that was unsettlingly mismatched with the decay around her. "Play with me, Mama." I'm so lonely, the giggle pleaded. Overwhelmed by the dread of unfulfilled innocence and a mother's sorrow, she felt a cold hand on her shoulder. Spinning around, she found nothing but the lingering echo of distressed laughter. The darkness itself seemed to breathe, the walls pulsating with the memories of lost souls. Desperate for answers, Marisol retraced her steps back to the journal-filled room. She leafed through her grandmother's confessions, paying careful attention to cryptic entries marked with symbols and frantic scrawls. Each page chronicled the descent of her ancestor into madness, a madness rooted in the belief that supernatural entities used bedtime stories as a gateway to live among the living. The stories, as legend had it, were not mere tales but actual chronicles of unspeakable horrors that took place when night fell. Marisol's heartbeat quickened when she read a particular passage. When darkness wraps around you like a shroud, listen closely to the stories that beckon in the night. They are true, woven from the fabric of nightmares. Let them cradle your soul into an eternal sleep where whispers turn into screams. At that moment, the temperature in the room plummeted. Frost began etching delicate patterns along the windows, each intricate design resembling shriveled faces lost in despair. A presence materialized at the threshold, a figure draped in tattered garments, its face obscured by a deep, soulless void. Its lips moved silently. In a halting spectral tone, it intoned, "Your grandmother tried to bind us with her words. Now it is your turn." Marisol clutched the journal to her chest, realizing that the entity was not simply a phantom, but something far more ancient, a collector of nightmares, a devourer of souls fed by the dark tales whispered into the unsuspecting ears of sleepers. The spirit advanced slowly, its hollow eyes fixed on her. "Do not be afraid," it hissed, a message both deceptive and chilling. For every story holds a truth, and every truth holds a terror beyond comprehension. Unable to flee, Marisol felt herself succumbing to a hypnotic paralysis. The mansion's corridors seemed to twist and elongate, each passageway leading her deeper into an uncanny labyrinth where the veil between reality and nightmare dissolved. As she wandered, voices rose in an eerie symphony, overlapping accounts of tragic fates and unspeakable losses. They recounted time-worn legends, a grieving mother roaming for her lost child, a soldier haunted by unseen enemies, and a forgotten soul condemned to wander every abandoned home, each story more terrifying than the last. In the heart of the manor, a massive stone fireplace dominated the room. Its charred embers pulsed like the beat of a monstrous heart. There, amidst the flickering shadows, Marisol recognized the ghastly visage of her grandmother. The spectral figure, pale, sorrowful, and exuding a profound despair, raised a trembling hand as if beckoning her closer. "I tried to protect you," the apparition murmured in a voice that trembled with regret. "I tried to bind them, to keep the tales locked away, but their hunger is infinite." Before Marisol could protest, the room was filled with a cacophony of voices. The sound was both urgent and mournful. "Listen, listen. We are the truth of your ancestors, the lost and tormented. Only by embracing our darkness can you find the way out." The air thickened with malevolent energy, and the burning sensation of guilt and impending doom overwhelmed her senses. Then, as if on cue, the floor beneath her creaked ominously. The mansion shuddered as if alive, groaning under the weight of its own secrets. A hidden compartment in the floor slowly swung open, revealing a spiraling staircase descending into a subterranean chamber. With no alternative but to follow, Marisol descended into the depths. The air grew stale, and torches lit by a spectral flame illuminated walls covered in cryptic markings. These ancient symbols narrated the tragic history of the cursed manor, a chronicle of despair, sacrifice, and the cyclical return of dark forces through the medium of storytelling. At the chamber's center lay a grand, archaic book, bound in what appeared to be human skin and inked with the darkest of secrets. Its pages trembled under an unseen breeze. Compelled by a force beyond her control, Marisol reached out to touch the book. The moment her fingers brushed the cover, a voice echoed in her mind, a voice that belonged to the entity from earlier. "Now you are bound by the power of our stories. Sleep and let the nightmares have you." Desperation surged within her. "No!" she screamed, her voice resolute despite the terror gnawing at every fiber of her being. "I won't let you have me." In that instant, the chamber erupted into chaos. The book flared with an unholy radiance, and the pages began to flutter wildly, revealing images of horror beyond mortal comprehension. spectral figures reaching out with skeletal hands, a sea of faces frozen in agonized expressions, and an endless void where time ceased to exist. Marisol staggered back, the ancient tome clutched tightly in her hands. But as she attempted to flee, the cavernous space shifted again. The walls pulsed like a living organism, and the very floor betrayed her by dissolving into a swirl of inky shadows. The whispers multiplied, speaking of an impending sleep so deep it would swallow her soul whole. Embrace the night, child, they urged with relentless insistence. Let your mind drift and awaken in eternal slumber. In a final act of defiance, Marisol slammed the book shut. The world seemed to shudder with a collective groan, as if the very fabric of the curse had been challenged. The malignant voices ricocheted around her, their tone laced with pain and fury. You dare defy us? You are now entwined with our legacy. There is no escape from the truth of our stories. Tears mixed with perspiration on her cheeks as she gathered every ounce of courage to tear her eyes away from the sinister book. With trembling determination, she made a desperate bid for the surface. Her footsteps echoed through the spiraling staircase as she ascended into the oppressive night. Above, the manor groaned as if in sorrow or warning. The heavy oak door creaked shut behind her, sealing away the horrors that lay within its walls. Outside, the chilly wind brought a fleeting sense of relief as Marisol sped away in her car, her mind a maelstrom of dread and disbelief. For a brief moment, as the manor's silhouette dwindled into the darkness, she dared to believe that perhaps the nightmare was over. But as she glanced at the rearview mirror, the static from the radio reemerged, now with a new message that cut through her fleeting hope. Do you sleep tonight, or do we sleep you? The car's engine faltered and the radio's spectral hum grew louder, sending icy tendrils down her spine. In a final, horrifying twist of fate, the tires spun on the uneven road and the world outside dissolved into a surreal haze of shadow and whispers. Marisol's scream was lost in the cacophony of the haunted tales woven into the fabric of night, as if her terror was merely another verse in the endless ballad of the cursed, the damned, and the forever sleepless. In the years that followed, reports emerged of a spectral presence roaming the deserted highways at night, an apparition with bloodshot eyes and a chilling message for all who dared to listen. True, scary stories to fall asleep have a way of finding you. And those unfortunate enough to cross its path would forever be drawn into the night's eternal embrace, where sleep was no longer a sanctuary but a doorway to an unending sinister tale.
Story number 2.
In the heart of a sprawling forest where the fog hung low like a shroud, a forgotten farmhouse sat in quiet decay. The structure, once proudly maintained by a family long dispersed, now creaked under the burden of age and the weight of secrets too ghastly to be spoken. It was here that Thomas, an investigative journalist known for exploring the darkest corners of human fear, had decided to spend one relentless, storm-tossed night. His goal was to uncover the truth behind a series of unsolved disappearances reported by terrified locals, a truth many believed was entwined with the legends of the cursed woods. The isolation was palpable as Thomas's battered pickup rumbled along a treacherous, unpaved road that wound its way into the forest. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay, and every rustle of leaves seemed to carry whispers of unspoken horrors. Shadows darted at the edge of his vision as he approached the farmhouse, its silhouette jagged against the bleeding twilight. He parked near the sagging porch and stepped out, the sound of crunching gravel underfoot echoing into the ominous stillness. Inside, the farmhouse was a mausoleum of memories. Faded photographs in broken frames, discarded toys scattered about, and furniture wrapped in dusty white sheets told the tale of a domestic life interrupted abruptly. Thomas's flashlight beams swept across peeling wallpaper and through rooms draped in layers of dust. Every creak in the floorboards, every sigh of the wind against the decaying wood seemed choreographed to unsettle him further. He set up his camera and audio recorders on a rickety table in the parlor, a room that bore heavy silence despite the storm's distant rumbles outside. As he prepared to interview what was left behind, a journal discovered in the attic detailing the family's final days, an uneasy feeling crawled along his spine. The journal's cover was embossed with intricate carvings of symbols that no modern scholar could decipher, hinting at rituals older than the farm itself. Thomas began to read aloud from the journal, his measured tone cutting through the silence. April 13th. The winds have grown maddening. Mother insists that we hear voices in the walls. Father seems distracted by things unseen, as if haunted by every creak of the night. His voice wavered ever so slightly when he reached an entry written in frantic scrawl. The forest calls to us, its song a prayer for the dead. We cannot escape its hunger. Tonight, the boundaries between our world and that of the lost grow thin. At that moment, a harsh rap echoed at the front door, a sound so abrupt and deliberate that Thomas's heart nearly stopped. He exchanged a confused glance with the specter of a memory, imagining the disappearance of a child from the nearby village, its echo now intertwined with his own experience. "Hello?" He called into the darkness, voice thick with both curiosity and dread. No answer came, only the pounding of rain against the windows and the persistent murmur of the forest. Resolute to not let superstition cloud his investigative instincts, Thomas approached the door. On the other side, beyond the fogged glass, stood a figure shrouded in darkness, a slender silhouette whose presence was unsettlingly composed. When the door creaked open, the figure's face was momentarily illuminated by a flash of lightning. It was pale and gaunt, eyes sunken into a visage of hollow despair, wearing tattered clothes that had clearly once been neat. The figure's whisper was low, almost inaudible beneath the tempest outside. "You have come searching for the truth that dwells here," it murmured, voice resonating with years of sorrow and lingering malice. Thomas's journalistic skepticism warred with a burgeoning instinct for self-preservation. "Who are you?" he demanded, struggling to maintain authority in a situation that defied rational explanation. The spectral figure paused, its mouth twisting in what could only be described as a wry smile of lament. "I am one of the lost," it replied, the words carrying both a greeting and a warning. "This house is a gateway between our souls and your world. But once you cross that threshold, you must be ready to shoulder the unutterable burden of our memories." Before Thomas could ask another question, the visitor dissolved into a swirling mass of fog, merging seamlessly with the storm that battered the farmhouse windows. In its wake, a trail of cold air seemed to press against Thomas's back as if urging him to follow. His rational mind screamed to retreat, yet a curiosity born of both professional drive and a morbid fascination with the paranormal pushed him onward. He resolved to explore further, convinced that every clue recorded in the journal was a piece of a larger, more terrifying puzzle. He ascended the narrow staircase toward the attic, the worn steps groaning under his weight. In the dim light, the attic revealed a chaos of relics, old trunks, scattered newspapers, and peculiar artifacts that felt vaguely pagan. One artifact in particular caught his attention: an ornate mirror framed with symbols matching those on the journal's cover. Its reflective surface was obscured by a thick film of dust, but as he wiped away the layers of neglect, a fleeting image emerged. An indecipherable scene of figures dancing beneath blood-red skies, their faces contorted in sorrow and terror. Thomas's breath hitched, and he instinctively muttered, "This can't be real." But the mirror's surface rippled as if stirred by an unseen force. From its depths, a voice softly intoned, "You have not yet seen our full lament." The words resonated deeply within him, stirring emotions and memories he couldn't possibly have known existed within his soul. Disturbed but determined, he continued reading the journal. The final entries recounted a secret ritual, a desperate attempt by the family to sever the unholy connection that had long bound the farmhouse to the restless dead of the forest. The instructions were detailed and demanding, requiring a sacrifice of pure emotion, a shedding of despair into the void. The chilling details were accompanied by hastily scrawled diagrams that wound their way through the pages like tendrils of some unholy vine, hinting at the unimaginable power residing within the darkest corners of human fear. As the final words spilled from the journal, the atmosphere in the attic thickened perceptibly. A sensation of being watched pressed in on every side, the whisper of unseen presences almost touching his skin like cold, clammy hands. "Enough!" Thomas cried out, but the silence that answered was hollow and devouring. In the sudden absence of sound, the creaks and groans of the old house turned into mocking laughter. The unsettling voice from the mirror returned, louder this time. "You dare to unearth our memories, to expose the fragile seams that hold this world apart from ours? The forest sings with the voices of those forever condemned to wander, and your presence here may tip the balance." It was no longer an invitation to learn, but a forewarning of doom. In that heart-stopping moment, the mirror's surface shattered like glass, scattering splinters of eerie light across the dim attic. In their reflection, Thomas saw fleeting images, faces of the missing, anguished and terrified, reaching out from the darkness, their eyes full of pleading that transcended time. The voices melded into a discordant symphony of terror. "Return what you have taken, or share in our fate," they cried in unison, the sound echoing over and over until it vibrated within his very bones. Desperation surged within him. With trembling hands, Thomas gathered the scattered pieces of the mirror and, guided by the cryptic diagrams in the journal, began to reconstruct the ritual to appease whatever ancient force had claimed dominion over the farmhouse. His pulse hammered in his ears as he arranged the shards in a precise pattern on the attic floor. With each piece meticulously placed, the temperature plummeted further, and a spectral luminescence bathed the room in a ghostly glow. At the center of the mosaic, he placed a carved, broken heart, a relic he discovered hidden beneath floorboards, believed to be imbued with the lingering emotions of a long-dead soul. As he chanted the ancient incantation from the journal, his voice wavered with both courage and despair. "From sorrow and fear, I call upon the lost. Return to the silence from which you came and let this burden be lifted." The words, uttered in the oppressive, halting cadence of someone caught between worlds, seemed to awaken an unseen presence. For a moment, everything stilled. The oppressive dread that had filled the attic receded, and an almost palpable calm settled over the space. Then, with a force that startled him, the shard mosaic burst into an explosion of blinding light. In that incandescent moment, Thomas glimpsed a panorama of terrible wonder. The anguished souls of the missing, their faces twisted in both pain and reluctant gratitude, now released from the prison of the farmhouse. The sight was overwhelming, as if he were witnessing a funeral for the collective despair of the living. But the jubilation was short-lived. As the light subsided, the chilling realization dawned on him that his efforts, however noble, had not ended the curse. They had merely unleashed a final reckoning. The floor beneath him shuddered violently, splinters of wood flying into the air, and the attic door slammed shut. From behind the walls, the sound of footsteps echoed, a slow, deliberate pace that spoke of inexorable approach. In the doorway, silhouetted against the spectral glow from the mosaic, a figure emerged. It was neither living nor dead, its form wavering like smoke in the wind, and its eyes were endless voids that promised oblivion. "Why have you disturbed our rest?" The figure intoned with a voice both ancient and sorrowful. "You have awakened our legacy." Its presence was suffocating, drawing the very life force out of the room. Thomas's mind raced, every logical thought overpowered by the raw terror of his predicament. In a final act of pleading desperation, he cried out, "I only wanted to know the truth. I meant no harm." The specter's response was a mournful sigh that reverberated through the manor's bones. "The truth you sought was never meant for mortal ears. Our stories are etched in the silence of forgotten souls, and those who listen must carry the weight of sorrow and despair." As its words drifted into the oppressive quiet, the specter extended a skeletal hand toward him. "Join us in eternal silence, so that your mortal heart may finally know peace." Thomas's scream was lost amidst the roar of the wind and the relentless creaking of the haunted house. In a whirlwind of terror and despair, he staggered backward, trying to escape the encroaching darkness that pulled him inexorably toward the void of the curse. The entire farmhouse seemed to convulse, as if engaged in a final, desperate struggle between the forces of mortal will and the ancient, malevolent powers of the forest. Outside, the storm intensified, lashing the farmhouse with torrential rain. The very trees moaned as their branches entwined, as if reaching to reclaim lost souls back into the earth. In one last agonizing moment of clarity, Thomas realized that his reality had fractured irreparably. What was once a quest for truth had mutated into a living nightmare, a warning to all who would trespass into realms better left undisturbed. As the night deepened, the farmhouse became a tomb not just of memories, but of tortured souls. The forest resumed its eerie silence, with only the rustling leaves and the faint, sorrowful hum of the spirits to remind any wanderer of the fate that befell those who dared to unlock the secrets of the lost. And deep within the decaying walls, the legacy of despair and the curse of the forest endured, a cautionary tale whispered on stormy nights, perpetually echoing through the corridors of time.
Story number 3.
In the days before autumn's bitter grip took hold, a strange sense of foreboding had crept over the small New England town of Chester Hollow, a quiet settlement where every whispered tale was met with knowing glances and avoidance. No one spoke of it openly, yet every resident harbored a secret dread of the old Merrick estate, a sprawling mansion on the edge of the woods. The mansion, long abandoned and surrendered to relentless decay, had a reputation that made even the most skeptical shudder in private. Stories of missing family members, inexplicable sounds, and a presence that lurked behind every creaking door had circulated for decades. A young historian named Evelyn Sinclair arrived in town in search of archival records and local lore that would shed light on the enigmatic legacy of the Merrick family. Drawn by the allure of forbidden knowledge, she intended to compile an extensive account of the estate's history. Little did she know that her quest would unearth a darkness that thrived on secrecy and fed upon the vulnerable souls who dared to disturb its slumber. On a chilly October morning, Evelyn drove down the narrow road that wound its way between towering trees, their skeletal branches tangled against a slate-gray sky. The estate loomed ahead like a jagged scar on the landscape, its once grand facade now marred by shattered windows and creeping ivy. A bitter wind hissed through the empty corridors as she stepped onto the creaking steps of the porch. The door, heavy with neglect, swung open with a mournful groan as if beckoning her inside. Inside the mansion was a labyrinth of dust and decay, a time capsule filled with forgotten memories and ghostly remnants. Evelyn's flashlight revealed portraits of the Merrick ancestors, their eyes painted with an eerie vitality that seemed to follow her every move. One painting in particular caught her attention, a somber portrait of a young woman whose eyes glimmered with both sorrow and a silent warning. The frame was elaborate, adorned with intricate carvings that hinted at lost rites and ancient secrets. As Evelyn approached, she felt a chill crawl along her spine, as if the eyes in the painting were silently judging her intrusion. A voice, faint and shuddering like the rustle of dead leaves, escaped from behind her. "Do you seek the truth, child?" Evelyn spun around, her heart pounding as she tried to locate the speaker. From the shadows near a tattered settee stepped an elderly man, gaunt and spectral in appearance. His clothes were of a time long past, and his presence carried the weight of sorrow. "Who are you?" Evelyn asked, her voice trembling despite her determination. "I am the keeper of this house's regrets," the man replied in a raspy tone that left no room for warmth. "I have watched over the secrets of the Merrick estate for many years, and now you must bear witness to our legacy." With those words, his figure melted into the shadows, leaving Evelyn with a profound unease and the unnerving sensation that she was not alone. Driven by both fear and an unyielding curiosity, Evelyn ventured deeper into the mansion, her steps echoing in the silence. Along the hallways, whispers of lost voices reached her ears, barely discernible over the groans of the ancient structure. In one dusty corridor, she discovered a study containing a vast collection of diaries and letters. There, she began to piece together the tragic history of the Merrick family, a tale marked by forbidden love, betrayal, and a pact with powers beyond mortal comprehension. One diary, belonging to Lydia Merrick, a central figure in the family's dark narrative, revealed that the family had tried to harness the essence of death and sorrow to achieve eternal life. In desperate despair over a series of untimely losses, they had turned to occult rituals, guided by a mysterious figure known only as the Curator. According to Lydia's writings, the ritual was meant to bind grief and transform it into a form of everlasting vitality. Instead, the ritual backfired, unleashing a malevolent force that fed on the anguish of both the living and the dead. As Evelyn read the last, harrowing entry, a sudden, icy gust of wind snuffed out her flashlight, plunging the room into darkness. In that moment, she heard a soft, mocking laugh that seemed to reverberate off the walls. "The truth you seek comes at a terrible price," a disembodied voice whispered. "Are you prepared to pay it?" Gritting her teeth, Evelyn managed to relight her flashlight, its beam slicing through the oppressive darkness. "Show yourself," she demanded, her voice louder than she felt. Silence answered her call, a silence that was heavy with the expectation of something unseen. The only indication of movement was a faint shadow gliding along the wall, retreating into a narrow doorway. Compelled by a mix of terror and fascination, she followed. The corridor led her to a narrow staircase spiraling upward to the attic, a place rumored to hold the remnants of the ritual. As the stairs creaked beneath her weight, Evelyn could feel the oppressive presence of something ancient and malevolent. At the top of the stairs, she pushed open a creaking door to reveal an attic frozen in time. In the center of the room stood an enormous, ornate mirror framed by the same intricate carvings as the portrait of the young woman. The mirror's surface was mottled with age, its glass clouded yet oddly captivating. Evelyn approached slowly, drawn to the mirror's enigmatic pull. As she gazed into it, her reflection wavered and shifted, replaced by fleeting images of long-forgotten memories. A family gathered in silent despair, spectral figures dancing in the periphery of vision, and the young woman from the portrait, her eyes now filled with an insidious light. With a start, Evelyn realized that the mirror was not reflecting her image alone. It was a window into a parallel tapestry of haunted lives. A guttural whisper emerged once more, this time emanating from within the mirror itself. "We are bound to this eternal sorrow," it intoned. "Your presence disrupts the fragile balance we have known for centuries." Evelyn stepped back, her pulse hammering in her ears. "What do you mean?" she asked in a nearly inaudible whisper. The mirror's surface rippled, and the young woman's face emerged with a chilling clarity. "Do you recall your own nightmares, the ones that wake you in the dead of night, drenched in sweat and fear?" the apparition asked, her voice both mesmerizing and deadly cold. "These are the echoes of our pact, a promise made in anguish and sealed in eternal torment." As the apparition's eyes bore into Evelyn's soul, the room seemed to shrink, and the air thickened with despair. The mirror began to vibrate, each pulse resonating in time with Evelyn's racing heartbeat, until the glass shattered in a cascade of jagged fragments. With each shard that fell, visions of the Merrick family's tragedies flashed before her eyes, a montage of sorrow, madness, and the irrevocable binding of souls through rituals steeped in darkness. Amid the clamor of breaking glass, Evelyn's mind teetered on the brink of overwhelming terror, and she felt a crushing weight as if the memories of every lost soul were pressing upon her very being. Instinctively, she tried to flee, but the door slammed shut, locking her inside the oppressive attic. Panic overtook her rational mind as the spectral voices swelled in a crescendo of sorrow and malice. "You cannot leave," they chanted, a monotonous litany that reverberated in her ears like a cruel nursery rhyme. "The debt must be paid." In the midst of the chaos, a single, desperate cry cut through the cacophony. "Release us!" The voice was both pitiful and rage-filled, a cry of a soul trapped for centuries in unending torment. It was then that Evelyn realized that the ritual had not only damned the Merrick family, it had ensnared every tormented spirit that had ever crossed the threshold of that accursed mansion. Struggling to steady herself, Evelyn recalled the diary's final passage, which hinted at a possible reversal of the curse. The instructions were scrawled in desperate haste. The only way to break the binding was to confront the source of the ritual, to face the curator himself, a figure shrouded in myth and darkness. Summoning the last reserves of her courage, she began to search for any indication of the curator's presence in the attic. Her trembling hands brushed against a heavy, leather-bound ledger hidden beneath a pile of old relics. Within its pages were cryptic symbols and names, each a casualty of the cursed pact. At the bottom of the ledger, a name was repeated over and over: Mordecai. The name sent a chill through her veins. Evelyn pieced together that Mordecai had been the enigmatic sorcerer who had orchestrated the ritual, promising salvation in exchange for obedience and the surrender of one's soul. Yet something had gone dreadfully wrong, dooming the Merrick family and countless others to an eternity of torment. The attic walls seemed to pulse as the whispers began to form a coherent command. "Invoke his name and unbind the curse," they urged in unison, voices mingling with the rustle of unseen breath. With shaking resolve, Evelyn spoke into the heavy, stifling air. "Mordecai, I call upon you." The atmosphere shifted in an instant. A freezing wind swept through the attic, extinguishing any fragile remaining light. In the inky darkness, a silhouette emerged, a tall, gaunt figure draped in robes that seemed woven from the night itself. Mordecai's eyes gleamed with a sinister light as he regarded Evelyn with a mixture of disdain and weary pity. "So you dare summon me, mortal?" he hissed, voice echoing as though it were spoken from the depths of a crypt. I want to free these souls, Evelyn stammered, her voice betraying both determination and dread. I cannot stand the weight of their suffering any longer. A crooked smile tugged at Mordecai's lips. Freedom, you say? Freedom comes at a cost far steeper than mere mortal comprehension. With a dismissive gesture, he advanced closer, each step measured and deliberate. The curse was my creation, born out of despair and the desperate need to transcend mortality. But in meddling with forces you cannot hope to understand, the Merricks, like so many others, became eternal prisoners. To break it, you must offer something equal to the pain the ritual inflicted. Evelyn's heart pounded as she listened, every instinct screaming for her to run. Yet the sight of the tortured souls trapped in the mansion, their anguished moans echoing in the darkness, sealed her resolve. Tell me what to do, she pleaded. Mordecai's laughter was low and bitter. Then listen well. To undo the binding, you must relinquish your deepest regret, transform your pain into forgiveness, and in doing so, release the hold that the sorrow has on these souls. His eyes glittered with eerie intensity. You must choose between your own salvation and theirs. For what felt like an eternity, silence reigned in the attic as Evelyn grappled with the impossible demand. Memories flooded her mind, a fractured past of loss, regret, and unhealed wounds. In that moment, the weight of her own sorrows crashed upon her like a tidal wave. The visage of her late brother, the echoes of unresolved apologies, the heavy burden of guilt for failures past, all converged into a single, unbearable truth. Her heart ached with the pain of everything she had ever wished she could undo. With tears streaming down her face, Evelyn choked out the admission that had long haunted her. I've always blamed myself for every heartbreak, every misstep, every loss. Her voice trembled as she continued. I carry this pain with me, and I'm willing to let it go if it means freeing these trapped souls. In that agonizing moment of vulnerability, she raised her trembling hands and spoke the words of forgiveness, both for herself and for those who had suffered. A surge of light erupted from within her, radiating outward until it illuminated every corner of the attic. The spectral figures, the tortured faces of the Merrick lineage and countless others began to stir. Their anguished cries softened to whispers of relief, and one by one, the apparitions faded away, their burdens lifted by the warmth of her sacrifice. Mordecai's eyes widened with both fury and disbelief as the oppressive darkness receded. No, this cannot be, he bellowed, his voice raw with malice. The ancient sorcerer recoiled as if burned by the unexpected power of redemption. His form started to disintegrate, the threads of his dark essence unraveling before Evelyn's tearful gaze. In a final, echoing whisper, he declared, "You have undone my creation, but the cost will never be forgotten." As the shattered remnants of the curse drifted into nothingness, a profound quiet settled over the mansion. The oppressive atmosphere that had once suffocated every corner of the estate slowly lifted, replaced by a tentative hope, a promise of new beginnings free from the shadows of old sorrows. Evelyn stood alone in the attic, exhausted yet illuminated by the liberation of so many lost souls. In the aftermath, the old Merrick estate faded from the collective memory of Chester Hollow, transformed by the healing light that had once been ignited in its cold, haunted corridors. Evelyn, forever changed by her encounter with darkness and redemption, continued her work as a historian. Yet, she never forgot the lessons learned in that cursed night, that even in the depths of despair, forgiveness has the power to break the unyielding chains of the past. And so, with the mansion now silent and the tortured voices at peace, the legacy of terror gave way to a legacy of healing, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable horror.
Story number 4.
In a quiet corner of an aging college town stood the Holloway Library, an edifice of faded grandeur and somber secrets. Its high arched windows and towering shelves had long been a sanctuary for scholars and wanderers alike. Yet beneath its scholarly veneer, the library was reputed to harbor mysteries darker than any book bound within its walls. Rumors whispered that its archives possessed a mind of their own, that unsolvable riddles and unnatural phenomena lurked in every shadowed aisle. No one truly knew when the inexplicable happenings began, only that the library's silent corridors had absorbed every whisper of terror from generations of patrons who had dared to listen. Irina Faust, a young literature professor with an insatiable curiosity for the occult, arrived in town to research rare manuscripts that were rumored to be hidden away among the library's labyrinthine stacks. As an academic by trade, she cared little for ghost stories, but the allure of forgotten lore and unexplained phenomena drew her in like a moth to a flame. On her first evening at the Holloway Library, a relentless autumn rain tapped mournfully on the leaded glass windows as she stepped through its heavy oak doors. The building's interior exuded a silence both intimate and oppressive, a silence that seemed to be punctuated by more than just the rustle of turning pages. Irina's footsteps echoed down a marble corridor lined with portraits of long-gone benefactors, whose eyes, too, appeared to follow her progress. She hesitated before a faded plaque reading simply, "In memory of those whose stories were left untold." The words resonated in her mind as she recalled the whispered urban legend of a forbidden manuscript hidden somewhere within the library, a book that chronicled real, unspeakable horrors experienced by those who had risked delving too deeply into the dark corners of human consciousness. Determined to uncover the truth, she made her way to the restricted archives, where ancient texts and brittle folios were carefully preserved in dim candlelight. Inside the archives, the air was chill and heavy with the scent of dust and decaying paper. Irina's lantern cast flickering shadows across the rows of neglected tomes, each spine holding a story of passion, despair, and madness. Among these relics, a single volume bound in cracked leather and embossed with cryptic sigils seemed to pulse with a lifelike energy. With trembling fingers, she opened the book and found that its pages were filled with macabre accounts written in a spidery hand. They were not mere fiction, but a visceral documentation of nightmarish events and unexplainable encounters recounted in a language that suggested both horror and longing. As she turned the fragile pages, an almost imperceptible murmur began to fill the stillness, a susurrus of voices that seemed to echo through the vaults of memory. Irina strained her ears. "Who's there?" She whispered, her voice barely more than a breath against the heavy silence. The murmuring ceased abruptly, replaced by an eerie quiet that made her heart pound louder. It was as if the library itself was holding its breath, anticipating her next move. That night, as Irina pored over the manuscript in a secluded reading room, the clock's hands glided past midnight. The room, illuminated solely by the soft glow of a table lamp, appeared to lean into darkness with every passing minute. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the soft, almost melodic sound of a piano playing in a distant chamber. The tune was hauntingly familiar, a lullaby her grandmother used to sing on sleepless winter nights. Chilled to the bone, Irina rose from her seat, determined to locate the source of this spectral music. She followed the sound through winding corridors and forgotten staircases until she came upon a door that she had never noticed before. The door was unremarkable, a plain, weathered barrier between the known and the unknown. Summoning every ounce of courage, Irina opened it, and the melody abruptly halted. Beyond the door lay a narrow, dust-choked passage that led to a secluded music room, its walls lined with antique instruments covered in cobwebs. In the center of the room, an old upright piano sat beneath a cracked skylight. The keys lay motionless, yet the scent of rotting wood and lingering melancholy was palpable. A voice, soft and laced with sorrow, drifted from the shadows. "You have come seeking the truth," it murmured. Irina's blood chilled. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice quavering despite her resolve. There was no immediate answer, only the sound of the wind sighing through broken glass. Then, in a slow, deliberate cadence, the voice returned. "I am a keeper of stories long forgotten, the souls of the damned who wander between these pages." As the words sank in, the room seemed to pulse. The piano's keys began to press down on their own accord, churning out a dissonant melody that filled the room with a heart-wrenching lament. Irina stumbled backward, the weight of unseen eyes upon her making every step an effort. "What do you want from me?" she cried, desperate for an explanation. The voice, now distorted as if it came from 1,000 distant echoes, answered, "To know their truths, you must see our suffering, bear witness to our eternal torment, and record what lies beyond the veil of mortal reckoning." A spectral figure materialized by the piano, a gaunt, ethereal woman in a tattered gown, her eyes deep pools of sorrow and despair. "I was once a poet, lost to madness in the pursuit of forbidden knowledge," the figure whispered. "Now I dwell here, trapped by the stories that refuse to die." In that shattering moment, Irina understood that the manuscript she had discovered was no ordinary book. It was a repository of the souls of those who had dared to challenge the boundaries of human understanding. Each harrowing tale contained within its pages was an echo of a life consumed by terror and regret, a legacy left to haunt the corridors of this cursed library. The spectral poet's presence brought with it memories of darkness that transcended time, her tale one among countless others etched into the very fabric of the library's being. Compelled by equal parts empathy and dread, Irina vowed then to unearth every hidden story, to liberate the tormented voices whose tragedies had been interred within the pages of that ancient manuscript. As if in response, the room's oppressive gloom deepened and the temperature plummeted. The spectral poet extended a trembling hand as though to offer solace or perhaps to bind her further. "You must face the archivist of our fate," she intoned softly. "Seek him out in the sub-basement where the legacy of our despair is sealed behind iron doors. Only then will the full extent of our suffering be revealed, and you may choose to free us or bind your own soul to our chronicles." Without time to deliberate, Irina found herself drawn to the sub-basement, a forbidden realm few dared to explore. After navigating a labyrinth of hidden stairways and narrow passages behind dusty bookshelves, she arrived at a heavy oak door reinforced with rusted iron. Her hands trembled as she turned the antique key she had found tucked in the margins of the manuscript. With a groan that echoed the lamentations of countless lost souls, the door swung open to reveal a vast crypt-like chamber. Inside, candlelight flickered weakly along rows of stone shelves bearing an unimaginable collection of relics. Here, above a massive, intricately carved stone sarcophagus, sat a figure cloaked in darkness. The archivist, if legends were to be believed, a keeper of forbidden histories whose eyes bore the wisdom and torment of centuries. His presence was overwhelming, his very aura whispering of unutterable sorrow and anger. "You have dared to come," he spoke in a gravelly tone that reverberated off the cold stone walls. "To know the truth is to bear its agony." Irina's voice was barely a whisper as she replied, "I want to understand. I want to free you, and all those trapped in these stories." The archivist's eyes, dark and fathomless, glimmered with an inscrutable mix of pity and forewarning. "Freedom is an illusion," he rasped. "What you seek is the dark heart of despair itself. Once it is known, there is no returning to the light." In that dire moment, the archivist extended his hand. Within his grasp lay a single ancient quill, its feathers stained with what looked disturbingly like dried blood. "This quill," he declared, "is the instrument through which our histories were written and our fates entwined. Rewrite our endings if you dare, and perhaps you will mend the severed threads of your own destiny." Trembling with trepidation, Irina accepted the quill. She felt a shuddering pull, as if the very essence of the quill had linked her soul to the sorrow of the damned. From that moment onward, she was compelled to traverse the boundary between life and death, penning down the final chapters of those tormented spirits. Each stroke of the quill on parchment revealed horrific flashes of lost lives and agonized destinies. With every word recorded, the spectral figures surrounding her stirred, their expressions transforming from despair to a muted hope. The air thickened with ancient regret and burgeoning liberation. But as Irina labored at her task, a relentless sense of dread whispered from the darkest recesses of her mind. The manuscript's pages continued to fill with horrors unspeakable, a litany of tragedies that grew increasingly grotesque with each passing minute. And while the voices of the departed offered subtle gratitude in return for their peaceful reprieve, one presence remained lurking at the edges of the ether. This presence was different. It was cold, calculating, and malevolent in its purpose. It was the memory of the original author of the cursed manuscript, a twisted soul known only as the chronicler, whose identity was as shrouded in mystery as the horrors he had documented. Late one stormy night, as thunder rolled like vengeful drums over the library's ancient roof, the chronicler finally made his presence known. While Irina was hunched over her parchment in the secluded sub-basement, a sudden chill swept through the chamber. The quill in her hand began to scribble on its own, its ink dark as midnight, etching cryptic symbols onto the parchment. A voice, low and dripping with malice, emanated from the shadows. "You dare alter the tale that was meant to be eternal?" It hissed, each syllable biting into the silence like a shard of ice. Irina's heart pounded as she stammered, Who are you? From behind a column draped in cobwebs stepped a gaunt figure, his eyes two pits of endless despair. I am the chronicler, he announced with chilling finality. I was once a man like you, filled with the same desire to understand the world's hidden truths, until I discovered that some stories are not meant to be rewritten, for in doing so, you unbalance the scales of fate. His presence exuded an aura of inevitable doom that chilled Irina to her very core. The chronicler advanced slowly, his gaze fixed on her quivering hands. Every stroke of that quill binds you closer to the legacy of suffering, he murmured. Do you truly wish to bear such a curse? For a long moment, silence reigned as Irina wrestled with her own destiny. She thought of the souls she had already helped release from their eternal torment. Yet, the chronicler's words echoed in the depths of her mind like a cursed refrain. Was she becoming a mere scribe of misery, her own identity dissolving into the tragic pages of a horror that stretched beyond time? Drawing upon the last reserves of her resolve, she lifted her chin, her eyes glistening with defiant determination. I choose hope over despair, she said firmly, the quill now trembling in her grasp as if acknowledging the cost of her decision. I choose to free not only you and the trapped souls, but also myself from this endless cycle of misery. In that fateful moment, the chronicler's smile twisted into a grimace of anguish and fury. Then suffer the consequences of your choice, he intoned, and the sub-basement exploded with a maelstrom of spectral energy. Books and relics flew from the shelves as the walls themselves seemed to convulse with ancient grief. The quill, still in Irina's hand, became a beacon of radiant light, its ink transmuting into shimmering droplets of hope that cascaded over the parchments, dissolving the cursed words that had bound so many generations. As the storm outside raged in chaotic triumph, the oppressive force that had long haunted the Holloway Library began to relent. The shattered fragments of lost lore coalesced into a new narrative, one of redemption, of liberation from relentless sorrow. The chronicler, his form now flickering between shadows and corporeal despair, faded into nothingness, his dominion over the cursed manuscript finally broken. Irina, exhausted yet emboldened, looked around as the sub-basement began to calm. The spirits whose eternal torment had animated the very walls of the library drifted away, their whispers softening into a quiet, bittersweet farewell. Outside, the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, casting long, hopeful beams through the fractured windows. In the days and months that followed, the Holloway Library transformed. The dark legends that had once suffused its corridors with dread gave way to a cautious optimism, a promise that even the most harrowing tales could be rewritten. Irina continued her work, not merely as a historian of horror, but as a guardian of the stories that needed closure. She ensured that every tragedy had an ending, every wail of despair a final note of solace. Yet even as tranquility returned and the library's haunted nights dwindled into memory, Irina knew that the scars of the past could never be entirely erased. The legacy of the forgotten souls and the damned chronicler would forever be interwoven with the library's history, a reminder that some stories, no matter how gruesome, hold the power to change lives and light the dark corners of the human heart.
Story number 5.
The old asylum had long been abandoned, its name lost amid local legends and cautionary whispers. Isolated on the edge of a dense pine forest, the building's crumbling stone walls and jagged rooftops loomed like a monument to suffering and secrets. Under an overcast sky, Daniel, a seasoned journalist with more curiosity than sense, found himself drawn to its eerie silhouette. He had heard rumors of strange cries echoing through its empty halls and inexplicable apparitions seen by those foolhardy enough to trespass. Determined to uncover the truth behind these whispers of despair, he approached the gates as twilight bled into the land. A heavy iron gate, rusted and chained, swung open with reluctant protest as if disturbed from a long slumber. Daniel's footsteps crunched on the gravel drive that led to a set of imposing double doors, their painted surface peeling away like shedding skin. He hesitated at the threshold, feeling an indescribable pull, a combination of dread and fascination, as the building seemed to breathe an audible sigh into the cool evening air. Inside, the asylum was a mausoleum of memories. The vast entry hall, once bustling with frantic activity and desperate pleas, now lay silent except for the distant drip of water echoing off stone walls. Faded murals depicting somber scenes of hope and despair decorated the walls, their colors diminished by time. Daniel's flashlight pierced the darkness with an unsteady beam. As he moved slowly, each step releasing a plume of dust that danced like tiny phantoms in its light. The stale odor of decay and old antiseptic mingled with an earthy scent, as if the building itself exhaled centuries of sorrow. He was not alone in his quest for the truth. A local historian, Miriam, had agreed to meet him here, a reluctant guardian of the asylum's secrets. They had arranged to share knowledge and piece together the fragments of the institution's grim past. Miriam's voice, when it came, was soft and laced with sorrow. "This place, it carries more than just memories," she murmured as she stepped from the shadows. Her eyes, wide and haunted, reflected both empathy and resignation. "Everyone who has set foot here leaves a part of themselves behind." Her statement lingered in Daniel's mind as they explored the labyrinthine corridors. In one sterile room, scattered with remnants of medical charts and faded photographs, he discovered a battered notebook. The pages were filled with scribbled notes, desperate drawings, and hastily written accounts by a nurse who had once worked there. One entry read, "I hear the voices of the lost at night. Their cries for mercy, their whispers of regret, they haunt every corner. I fear these walls are alive, absorbing the misery of all who suffer within." A shiver raced down his spine. "Do you think these voices still linger?" he asked, trying to keep the tremor out of his voice. Miriam's only response was a sad smile and a nod toward a door at the end of the hall. "They say the therapy wing holds secrets no one should disturb," she explained. "After the experiments were abandoned, many patients were left to die, and their anguish never left these halls." They proceeded down a narrow corridor, the linoleum floor cracked and peeling. The sound of their footsteps seemed to trigger faint echoes, as if the building remembered every stride. At the end of the corridor, an iron door stood slightly ajar. Miriam's hand hesitated on its cold handle. "I haven't dared to step through here in years," she whispered. "Inside lies the record room. It's where the administrators kept files on every patient and every experiment." Daniel pushed the door open, half expecting resistance from a force unseen. The interior was even darker than the rest of the asylum. Shelves of dusty files and rusted cabinets lined the walls. An overwhelming stillness lay in the air, punctuated only by the occasional scraping sound that made them both jump. While Daniel examined a stack of files detailing the names, dates, and disturbing notes of treatments administered in a misguided pursuit of curing the human mind, a sudden gust of cold air burst through the room. The papers shivered as though in fear, and a low, guttural whisper rose from the depths of the darkness. "Help us," the voice seemed to beg. A desolate cry that spoke of endless torment. Daniel's heart hammered wildly in his chest. Miriam's eyes widened, and she gripped his arm tightly. "We must leave this room," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "This isn't just history, it's a wound that still bleeds." Before they could withdraw, a sharp sound like the slam of a heavy door echoed through the record room. Files fluttered to the ground as if caught in an unseen whirlwind. Daniel's flashlight danced wildly over the chaos, illuminating a fleeting, spectral figure in the mirror of a shattered filing cabinet. A figure that resembled a gaunt man in a white hospital gown, his eyes hollow and pleading. For a moment, the figure's presence dominated the room, then vanished into the darkness as quickly as it had appeared. "Who are you?" Daniel called out, though his voice was barely audible. The room fell silent except for the tapping of his own heartbeat. Miriam knelt beside a scattered file and picked up a photograph depicting a group of patients, their faces gaunt and eyes sorrowful. "They were forgotten," she said quietly, "abandoned by a system that saw them as experiments rather than souls." Resisting the urge to flee immediately, Daniel and Miriam decided to continue their investigation deeper into the asylum, their resolve strengthened by a need to honor the pain of those long departed. They climbed a narrow, creaking staircase that led to the upper levels, a vast wing once dedicated to housing the most troubled patients. As the two ascended, the temperature seemed to drop further, and the narrow steps echoed with each cautious step, as if announcing their approach to the dormant rooms above. On the second floor, the hallways narrowed into a maze of dimly lit cells. Many of these rooms were in complete disrepair, with broken windows and rusted door frames. But one door, marked only by a faded number, called to them. Relics of personal belongings, A dried-out cup, a moth-eaten blanket remained in the cell, and in the corner, an antique mirror hung on the wall, its surface clouded by decades of neglect. It was here that Daniel noticed something impossible. Faint inscriptions on the mirror, words that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. In barely legible script, the inscription read, "In the reflection, we reside. In the silence, we cry." As he stared into the mirror, the reflection began to change. His own face blurred and merged with another, a young woman with desperate eyes and a forlorn expression. He blinked several times, certain he was mistaken, but the image persisted and seemed to whisper words he could almost decipher. "Remember me. Freedom." The voice was both distant and intimately familiar, like a memory buried deep within his subconscious. Startled, he turned to Miriam, whose expression had grown grave. "I saw someone," he confessed in a trembling tone. "In the mirror, a woman. She called for help." Miriam's eyes filled with tears. "That was Emily," she whispered, "a patient who vanished under mysterious circumstances. They say her spirit never left these halls, condemned to relive her final agonizing moments." Their conversation was cut short by a sudden violent tremor that shook the corridor. The mirror shattered with a thunderous crash, and from the splintered glass, fragments flew across the room like shards of sharp ice. In the shock of the moment, the duo was separated by a forceful gust that seemed to swirl from nowhere, a wind carrying with it voices of raw grief and yearning. The ensuing moments blurred together into a chaotic symphony of terror. Daniel found himself stumbling down a long corridor as lanterns flickered and died, plunging the hallways into oppressive darkness. Whispers echoed all around him, mingling with the soft, pitiful weeping of unseen souls. "Don't let go," one voice murmured, barely audible but filled with imploring sorrow. "Help us, please." Every step he took felt like wading through a river of despair, his mind tormented by flashes of the faces he had seen in the journal files and the specters glimpsed in his peripheral vision. His breath grew shallow with each echoing footfall, and the sensation of being watched deepened, until he was convinced that the asylum itself was an entity, sentient, hungry, and determined to consume the last vestiges of hope. In a momentary break from the relentless onslaught of dread, Daniel found himself in what appeared to be a common room. The space was lined with dusty sofas and a once elegant fireplace now cold and lifeless. Against the far wall hung a large, ornate clock whose hands were stuck at 2:13, as if time had been trapped at the precise moment the building fell silent. For a fleeting moment, the oppressive air seemed to yield to a melancholy calm. However, even that brief interlude was shattered when a series of deliberate knocks rattled the heavy door that led to a back passage. "Who's there?" Daniel demanded, his voice echoing off the barren walls. The knocks persisted, steady, rhythmic, insistent. With cautious resolve, he approached the door and slowly opened it. Outside, the corridor beyond was cloaked in impenetrable darkness. But then, emerging from the shadows, a figure stepped forward. Draped in tattered clothing and moving with unnatural fluidity, the figure was unmistakably human, yet undeniably otherworldly. Its eyes, obscured in darkness, glinted with a feral intensity as it advanced slowly. "Why do you disturb our rest?" the figure hissed, its voice carrying the weight of centuries of sorrow and indignation. "There is nothing here for the living to understand." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. I only want to help," he stuttered, stepping back as the figure drew nearer. "If you're in pain, let me." A cold laugh erupted from the depths of the darkness, silencing him. "Help?" It scoffed. "What can a mortal do for those who have suffered beyond the veil of time?" The figure's ethereal hand reached out, its long, bony fingers hovering as if to touch him. In that moment, the oppressive atmosphere closed in, and the line between reality and nightmare blurred. Determined not to be overcome by fear, Daniel gathered himself and pressed on, urged by an inner drive to reveal the truth hidden within these forsaken halls. Every ounce of his being screamed to flee, yet every step forward deepened his commitment to unearthing the atrocities committed here. The tormented tales of forgotten souls who never received peace. With painstaking care, Daniel retraced his steps to the record room. There, scattered among the decaying files, he uncovered a final tattered document, one that detailed an experimental procedure meant to free the patients from their internal torment, a final promise of redemption that was never fulfilled. The document, signed by a Dr. Hawthorne, a man whose name had vanished from memory along with all records of his work, spoke of a ritual to sever the bonds between the living and the damned. It was a desperate last measure, designed with the hope of allowing lost souls to finally rest. But the document ended abruptly, as if the writer had been forced to abandon his work in the midst of terror. Armed with this forbidden knowledge, Daniel and Miriam convened in the common room, their faces ashen in the flickering light of a dying lantern. Miriam's trembling hands clutched the photograph of Emily, and her eyes reflected the anguish of a legacy too terrible to be forgotten. "We must complete the ritual," she whispered. "If we do, perhaps we can bring them peace." Daniel hesitated. "But what if we make things worse?" he asked, the gravity of the decision weighing heavily on him. Miriam's gaze was resolute as she replied, "Every soul deserves the chance to be freed from its eternal suffering. We owe them that much." With no other recourse, they gathered the remnants of the documents and prepared to perform the final rite. In the dead center of the common room, they cleared away broken furnishings and arranged a makeshift altar from dusty remnants of prayer books and old rusted utensils from the asylum's long-forgotten kitchen. The air grew palpably colder, and the distant sound of moaning winds mingled with the soft murmur of voices that seemed to arise from the very walls. Miriam began to recite the incantation written in shaky, desperate script. Her voice, though quavering, carried a strange authority that resonated with the sorrow embedded in the building. As she spoke, the shadows along the walls lengthened and twisted, forming the silhouettes of anguished faces and reaching hands. Daniel joined her, his voice steady despite his terror, and together they intoned the words that had once been meant to sever the asylum's grip on its haunted past. As they reached the final lines, a surge of spectral energy pulsed through the room. The shattered pieces of the mirror, earlier scattered across the floor, began to reassemble with a supernatural precision, forming an unbroken surface that radiated a cold blue light. In that light, the faces of countless souls, trapped in perpetual anguish, appeared, their eyes filled with hope and longing for release. For a long, excruciating moment, the common room became a battleground between the forces of despair and the fragile promise of redemption. The oppressive weight of the building's history, the sorrow of those who had suffered, and the raw determination of two mortal souls converged in a single point of profound beauty and heartbreak. With one final, echoing word, the assembly of specters began to fade. Their pained expressions softened, replaced by a peace that had eluded them for so long. In the aftermath, as the unnatural chill receded and the oppressive darkness lifted, the asylum's haunted corridors grew silent. Daniel and Miriam, their faces streaked with tears and illuminated by the ghostly blue glow, felt the heavy burden of decades of torment finally begin to ease. The tragic history of the asylum remained in their memories, a permanent scar on the fabric of the town's past. But in that moment, hope had triumphed over despair. Outside, as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the asylum's grim facade took on a gentler aspect. A monument not only of untold suffering, but also of redemption and the possibility of peace. Daniel and Miriam emerged into the cool morning, forever changed by the horrors they had witnessed and the solace they had managed to bestow upon the lost souls. They carried with them not just the story of the asylum's tragic past, but also the bittersweet memory of a night where darkness itself was challenged by a single spark of hope.
Story number 6.
Under a moonless sky that blanketed the world in an impenetrable darkness, an eerie glow emanated from the dilapidated ground of a once celebrated carnival. For years, the abandoned fairground on the outskirts of Blackwood had been the epicenter of whispered local lore, a place where laughter and song had long since been replaced by silence and sorrow. No one dared venture near after midnight, for it was said that the restless ghosts of performers and unfortunate patrons still roamed its vacant rides, forever bound to a night of horror. Evan Calloway, a hardened photographer with an appetite for the inexplicable, had come to this forsaken place with the conviction that true stories of terror were to be captured by those brave enough to walk where others feared. Drawn by the lure of urban legends and the possibility of immortality through his lenses, Evan arrived one chilly October evening, determined to document the grim secrets that lay buried in the carnival's decaying remnants. The gravel road that led to the fairground twisted like a serpent beneath his headlights. As he approached, a suffocating stillness enveloped the scene. Rusted rides creaked with the weight of time, and weathered tents, their once vibrant stripes now faded to sorrowful grays, drooped like the lifeless carcasses of once joyful dreams. The flickering neon sign at the entrance, barely legible as Rookwood Carnival, vibrated weakly under the influence of an intermittent breeze, its intermittent pulses casting long, dancing shadows across the entrance. Evan stepped out of his car with deliberate care, his boots crunching on broken glass and shattered dreams. His breath plumed visibly in the cold air, mingling with the whispering wind as he advanced toward the midway. A palpable energy radiated through the darkness, a silent promise of both wonder and dread. Though rationality attempted to dismiss the foreboding as an overactive imagination, a part of him felt that tonight, fate had conspired to reveal something unspeakably real. Near the center of the carnival lay the funhouse, a grotesque mirror maze that had once delighted the eyes of children with its warped images and bright colors. Now its facade was a patchwork of peeling paint and shattered mirrors, each reflecting a glimpse of the past in fractured shards. Evan's first step through the heavy, warped doorway was met with a sudden hush, a moment in which the world fell silent, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Inside, his flashlight beam cut through the murk, revealing corridors lined with mirrors that seemed to ripple as though stirred by some unseen force. At first, his own terrified reflection appeared in every surface, eyes wide with both anticipation and dread. Then, inexplicably, one mirror began to distort the image further until it showed not his face, but that of a gaunt clown, its smile twisted into a macabre rictus of sorrow and malice. Who are you?" Evans stammered, his voice echoing unnaturally in the confined space. The clown's lipless grin widened, and in a voice that sounded like the rustling of old circus posters, the specter replied softly, "I was meant to bring joy, but joy turned to tragedy under the spotlight of deceit. Stay and learn our truth." Every word vibrated with despair as if the echoes were sent from beyond the grave. Evan's skin prickled, and despite a mounting urge to flee, his curiosity compelled him onward. He wandered deeper into the funhouse, each turn of the labyrinth guiding him through corridors of distorted carnival memories. He encountered other apparitions, a tightrope walker frozen mid-stride, a juggler whose objects cascaded in slow, mournful arcs, and a ringmaster whose once imposing top hat now seemed a crown of sorrow. Their eyes, hollow and forlorn, silently pleaded for their story to be remembered. Emerging from the funhouse's suffocating grip, Evan found himself in the central carnival tent, a vast canopy that hung in tatters from a time when the air had thrummed with music and laughter. Now the space was dominated by oppressive shadows and the distant sound of a calliope playing a warped, off-key melody. He set up his camera, determined to capture the spectral audience that lingered in every corner. As his lens adjusted to the gloom, a figure detached itself from the darkness near the stage, a young woman clad in a faded costume, her eyes as dark as the void behind them. "Are you lost too?" she whispered, her tone both inviting and mournful. Evan's heart pounded as he realized that her presence was neither entirely malevolent nor benign. It was simply sorrow incarnate, an echo of a life that had been forcibly severed from its time. "I'm Evan," he replied, forcing steadiness into his voice. "I came to document what happened here. Who are you?" She hesitated, a single tear sliding down her cheek, glistening in the weak light before vanishing into obscurity. "I am Leela," she answered softly. "I was one of the performers, one of the souls who gave everything for the show, but the show ended in violence, in betrayal." Her words painted a tragic narrative in Evan's mind, one that challenged the facade of a cheerful carnival. "Every night I return, seeking closure that never comes, and tonight you are here to witness us." Before Evan could inquire further, the tent trembled with a deep, resonant sound. The heavy heartbeat of a malignant force awakened. The Calliope's notes turned discordant, each tone a dagger in the silence. Shadows coalesced as the tent's canvas billowed as if in a gale, even though the wind outside had died to a whisper. The spectral performers moved as one, their movements both mournful and vengeful. The ringmaster's voice thundered from the darkness, "You dare disturb our eternal performance, mortal? There is no exit from the carnival of sorrow." The words ignited a rush of panic in Evan's veins. He sprinted toward the exit, but the tent's configuration had shifted, leaving him in a maze of cloth and echoes. Lila appeared by his side, her face etched with regret and urgency. "You must listen. she pleaded, grabbing his arm. The fate of our souls is tethered to the secrets of tonight. There is a story hidden in every shadow, and if you leave now, you'll be lost in the carnival's endless loop. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears and eternal longing. Help us remember so we might find peace. With her words echoing like a heartbeat within him, Evan halted his flight. He realized that he stood at a crossroads, to flee into oblivion or to unearth the deep mysteries that had ensnared countless lives. Compelled by an empathy he had long denied himself, he followed Lila as she led him through a series of narrow passageways behind the stage. In these secretive corridors lay remnants of a darker history, a backstage area littered with faded posters, handwritten diaries, and costumes that reeked of sorrow. Evan discovered a battered trunk tucked away in a dusty corner. Inside, yellowed letters and photographs chronicled the rise and fall of the carnival, the lives of the performers, and the fateful night of the great accident. One letter, in a trembling scrawl, recounted how a fire had erupted suddenly during the final act, trapping performers inside the tent. Rumors of sabotage, envy, and unbridled madness swirled around the calamity, and many believed that the voices of the dead had been permanently severed from the world of the living. Now these souls were left to wander in anguish, compelled to reenact their final moments over and over for eternity. As Evan read the letter, the sound of distant sobbing echoed through the halls, each keening lament, a reminder of promises broken. "They need to be remembered," Lila murmured, her voice trembling. "Their stories are fragments of our truth. Only by piecing them together can we hope to free ourselves from this eternal limbo." Determined, Evan began photographing the relics that chronicled the carnival's sorrowful legacy. As he worked, he conversed with the spectral inhabitants, their voices fragmented yet filled with emotion. The tightrope walker recounted how his final act was marred by betrayal from those he trusted most, while the juggler spoke of dreams shattered by greed and despair. Each tale was a thread in a tapestry of horror, weaving together love, loss, and the twisted cruelty of fate. Yet amid these many voices, one name resonated above all others, the notorious ringmaster, Archibald Crane. According to the scattered documents, Crane was once the charismatic leader of the carnival, revered for his flamboyant style and fearless leadership. But on the night of the disaster, his ambitions soured into envy and madness. Whispers claimed he had intentionally set the stage for catastrophe, sacrificing lives to consolidate his power over the desperate and disillusioned. His name had thus become a curse, a symbol of treachery that doomed the carnival to oblivion. Now, as the night deepened and the spectral glow intensified, the grand marquee overhead began to shudder. An oily mist seeped from its seams and pooled upon the creaking wooden floor. Lila's face drained of color as she pointed toward the far end of the corridor, where a large, ornate door stood partially ajar. "That door leads to the inner sanctum," she said in a quivering whisper. "It is there that Crane's final performance is forever replayed, a ritual of despair that binds our souls here." Compelled by an unspoken need for closure and justice, Evan approached the door with cautious resolve. With each step, the air grew colder and heavier, as if burdened by the weight of innumerable sorrowful confessions. He pushed the door open, and it groaned in protest, revealing a circular room dominated by a cracked mirror that spanned an entire wall. Within its depths, swirling images of the past played out in endless loop, a night of chaos, flame, and betrayal. The mirror was a portal to the fateful moment when the carnival had been thrust into darkness. A spectral figure emerged from the swirling images, a tall, imposing man with eyes of burning coal and a smile devoid of humanity. Archibald Crane's presence was both commanding and horrifying, his persona radiating an aura of absolute malice. "Welcome, visitor," he intoned, his voice a resonant baritone that seemed to vibrate through the very floor. "You have come to bear witness to our final act, but can you truly handle the truth that lies within?" Evan's heart pounded so fiercely it threatened to shatter his resolve. His voice, barely audible, managed to ask, "What do you want from us? What did you do?" Crane's smile twisted unnaturally, and he stepped closer as if to envelop Evan in his inky darkness. "I orchestrated perfection," he said icily. "I gave this carnival its heartbeat by feeding on the despair of dreams gone awry. In my ambition, I wove a tapestry of sorrow that would bind every soul to an endless performance, a performance for which there is no curtain call." The mirror's surface rippled with memories. Flames devouring the tent, the screams of the fallen, and a desperate struggle against an inevitable fate. The weight of Crane's confession pressed upon Evan as if his own soul were being weighed in the balance. "There is a price for such ambition," Crane continued, his tone laced with bitter satisfaction. "And tonight, through you, the final act can be rewritten, or so you believe." As his words echoed, the room around them convulsed with a force that threatened to tear reality apart. The spectral performers, Lila the clown, the tightrope walker, and countless others, emerged from the mirror's depths. Their eyes pleaded silently, desperate for release from the cruel trap of repetition. Lila stepped forward, her hand outstretched toward Evan. "Help us remember who we were," she cried softly. "Break the cycle of agony by telling our stories as they truly unfolded, not as twisted caricatures of false hope." In that charged moment, Evan recognized that his journey was not merely to document horror for his own fame, but to become the harbinger of truth for these forsaken souls. His camera, once an instrument of objective recording, was now a bridge to their eternal plight. With resolute determination, he raised his lens and began capturing every anguished detail of every flicker of sorrow and betrayal. His clicks became the heartbeat of the room, marking the rhythm of a final reckoning. The mirror flickered violently, as if it sensed the rising tide of absolution. Crane's spectral form staggered, his eyes narrowing in furious disbelief. "You dare defy me?" he bellowed, his voice distorting as the forces of reckoning swirled about him. The air exploded with the clamor of voices, the collective cry of those long silenced, and the sharp sting of retribution. In the ensuing chaos, the mirror shattered into countless fragments, each shard reflecting memories of liberation and the hope of redemption. As the shards cascaded to the cold floor, the tortured visages began to fade, replaced gradually by a serene calm. The oppressive gloom that had choked the room lightened to a spectral twilight, and the souls, freed from their endless torment, began to dissipate like mist under a pale morning sun. Crane, his power broken and his legacy crumbling, let out one final harrowing howl, a sound that resonated with every injustice ever born in that cursed carnival, and then he too vanished into the darkness. In the profound silence that followed, Evan and Lila stood amid the scattered remnants of a nightmare now dissolving into peace. The carnival grounds outside, once pulsating with malevolence, seemed to exhale a collective sigh of relief. The once haunted rides stood motionless under the wan light of approaching dawn, their sinister whispers now replaced by the quiet hum of a world ready to forget its darkest hours. Evan's camera lay heavy in his hands, its memory filled with the final truth of the carnival, a narrative of betrayal, of unfulfilled dreams, and the ultimate release through remembrance. Lila, her spectral form gradually fading as her purpose was fulfilled, offered one last sorrowful smile. A silent thank you for the redemption her soul and those of her companions had long awaited. As the first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon, the abandoned carnival transformed. Though its structure remained a battered relic of the past, a new story had been etched into its very foundations. A story of grief transmuted into hope, of pain recognized and set free through the power of remembrance. Evan, forever changed by the night's harrowing events, drove away with a heavy heart and a promise whispered on the wind that he would always honor the lost souls whose stories had given them the courage to challenge the darkness. Even now, in the quiet moments before dawn, if one listens closely on those lonely roads, the soft echoes of a Calliope melody may still be heard. A bittersweet refrain, a reminder that even in the most terrifying of tragedies, the light of truth has the power to vanquish the darkest of curses.
Story number 7.
In a forgotten stretch of land where the tangled forest met a barren moor, a lonely mansion stood shrouded in perpetual gloom. Locals whispered its name, Avermont House, with a mix of dread and pity. Decades ago, it had belonged to a wealthy family whose lineage had been extinguished by scandal and tragedy. Now, the mansion's broken windows and sagging eaves bore silent witness to an endless reign of despair. Marion Reed had grown up listening to those whispered stories on stormy evenings. Now, a determined investigative journalist, Marion had returned to Avermont House to uncover the truth behind the legends. With her worn leather satchel, an analog camera, and a notebook scrawled with old rumors, she drove along a winding country lane beneath an ashen sky. The trees bordering the road seemed to lean in conspiratorially as if to warn her of the impending darkness. The crunch of gravel under her tires was accompanied by an unspoken, ominous promise, a destiny set to unravel with each painful mile. The mansion emerged like a dark specter against the bleak horizon. Its stone facade, mottled with centuries of neglect, was partially obscured by ivy and gnarled vines. The front door hung askew on rusted hinges, as though it had given up resisting the passage of time. Marion took a steadying breath as she pushed it open, the creak echoing in the vast, decaying foyer. Dust motes danced in narrow beams of light that struggled to penetrate the stagnant air. Every step Marion took felt like trespassing on forbidden ground. The hallways were cluttered with broken furniture and faded portraits whose eyes seemed to follow her every move. A heavy silence weighed on her, interrupted only by the scuttle of unseen creatures behind debris and the occasional groan of the settling structure. Marion's pulse quickened as she gingerly made her way to what appeared to be a parlor room, its grandeur long eroded by sorrow. A grand piano stood in one corner, its keys yellowed and chipped, yet inexplicably arranged as if expecting an audience. Settling on a dusty armchair, Marion opened her notebook and began scribbling down details that her mind labored to reconcile with the lingering legends. It was then that a whisper came, a soft murmur that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The sound was at once gentle and filled with despair. "Why have you come?" it asked, each word dribbling out like a mournful confession. Marion's heart hammered in her chest. I just want to know the truth," she managed, her voice barely rising above the stagnant air. The whisper lingered, growing more distinct, a chorus of voices, layered and sorrowful. "Truth is a burden here," they intoned in unison, as though the mansion itself was speaking. She stood and followed the sound down a narrow corridor lined with ancestral portraits. Shadows danced upon the walls, twisting into faces of anguish. One portrait in particular commanded her attention, a young woman with eyes so full of terror and longing that Marion could almost see her soul bleeding through the canvas. The plaque read, Evelyn Avermont, 1892. It was said that Evelyn had perished under mysterious circumstances, her story interwoven with a secret ritual gone horribly wrong. Trepidation intermingled with an unyielding curiosity, Marion ascended a creaking staircase to the upper floors. Each step seemed to echo with memories of long-forgotten voices. The corridor upstairs was lined with closed doors, many of which were sealed shut with rusted locks. One door, marked only by a faint inscription in faded calligraphy, Room of Whispers, beckoned her. Marion's hand trembled as she grasped the cold brass knob and slowly turned it. Inside, the room was sparse and vacant, save for a single antique mirror that dominated one wall. Its surface was murky with age, the edges chipped and worn. As Marion approached, the mirror's surface began to quiver as though stirred by a hidden wind. In the trembling glass, instead of her reflection, she saw images flickering from another time. A dark assembly lit by dim candlelight, a group of solemn figures gathered around a central figure whose eyes burned with sorrow and fury. One of them stepped forward, and as Marion squinted, she heard the figure speak in a voice that was both pleading and commanding. "Remember us," it whispered, voice overlapping with 1,000 echoes. The covenant was sealed in blood and broken by treachery. Before Marion could react further, a shudder ran through the mirror, and the vision dissolved into a chaotic montage. Flashes of ritualistic symbols, hands raised in silent supplication, and the indistinct outline of a woman whose anguished face seemed to reach out from the depths of despair. Marion staggered back, her heart pounding against her ribs as she fumbled to steady herself. Was it merely a trick of the light, a residue of folklore given form? Or was the mansion revealing its buried past? A sudden clatter from behind made her whirl around. At the corridor's end stood a man, his figure obscured by darkness. The shadows around him bent and twisted until his features became clear. Gaunt, with hollow eyes that glowed with an inner malice, and a mouth set in a permanent sneer. "You should not have come," he said, his tone both condemning and sorrowful. "Avermont House does not forgive the inquisitive." Marion's voice wavered as she responded, "I only want to understand what happened here." The man's eyes narrowed and he advanced slowly, his footsteps silent on the creaking floor. Some truths are better left hidden beneath layers of time and regret. You risk not only your sanity, but your very soul if you pry too deeply into our past. His words resonated with the despair woven through the walls, and for a moment, Marion considered retreat. Yet the resolve to uncover the mystery that had haunted her since childhood overpowered her instinct to flee. "I must know," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady, though her hands trembled. "I owe it to those who cannot speak for themselves." The specter paused as if weighing her determination against the inevitability of doom. "Then follow me," he said finally. With measured steps, the ghost turned and led her down a narrow hall lined with locked doors until they reached a heavy iron door, half concealed by cobwebs and shadow. "Behind here lies the Chamber of Secrets," he intoned. "Enter and face the reality of our curse." Marion's heart pounded like a war drum as she hesitated before the door. A force both magnetic and repelling drew her forward, memories of whispered warnings combined with an unquenchable thirst for truth. With a deep breath, she pushed the door open, revealing a vast, dimly lit library whose walls were lined with ancient tomes and grim diaries. The air was thick with the scent of decaying paper and candle wax. In the center of the room, upon an ornate pedestal, lay a battered ledger written in spidery, faded ink. The apparition's voice drifted behind her. "This ledger contains every secret, every sin committed under the Avermont name. Read and you shall see." Marion reached for it cautiously. The pages detailed a macabre history, accounts of a forbidden ritual, desperate attempts to cheat death, and a betrayal that had sealed the fate of the entire family. It told the story of Evelyn Avermont, a woman who had been driven to madness by grief and guilt. In a bid to resurrect lost love, she had summoned forces beyond mortal ken, binding the souls of her kin in a cursed covenant that had doomed them all. As Marion read, a spectral chill crept along her spine. The ledger described that on night of the ritual, the man's unsalde forbedden and most overupshooting by Salkan and Stalk of Moberty and Try. Ada Gretsch concentring so like for get out after control then trek into the pub. The ghostly figure that had led her here was revealed as the tortured soul of Malcolm Avermont, the husband who had been the intended savior, but had instead become the architect of despair when his heart was consumed by jealousy and terror. "Malcolm," Marion whispered, her voice cracking. In response, a sob, raw and full of regret, rippled through the chamber. The air thickened, and then before her eyes, Malcolm materialized in full, a gaunt man in antiquated attire, his eyes brimming with both sorrow and fury. "I have waited so long for a reckoning," he said, his voice echoing with anguish. "Every day, every hour, these walls have witnessed our suffering. I beg you, listen to our truth and free us from this perpetual damnation." His outstretched hand was translucent and trembling, as if it could vanish with the slightest touch. Marion's mind reeled with the weight of the revelation. In that moment, she understood that the mansion was not merely haunted by the memories of its tragic past. It was alive with the collective torment of those who had been consumed by it. "How can I help you?" she implored softly. "What must be done to break the curse?" Malcolm's eyes shone with a desperate hope. "The ritual can be undone only by an act of true repentance, a sacrifice of one's deepest regret, a willingness to forgive the unforgivable. You must bear our stories to light so that the burden of our sins might be lifted." His voice was a fragile thread of possibility, fraying with the pull of unspoken remorse. At that moment, a low guttural howl reverberated through the chamber, a sound not made by any living being. The ledger's pages began to flutter violently as if stirred by an unseen storm, and the shadows along the walls wavered into disturbing shapes. "But beware," Malcolm warned, his tone turning grave. "For those who meddle in these affairs risk becoming bound themselves to the sorrow that clings to this place." Despite the danger, Marion resolved to act. "I will do what I must," she said firmly, though every fiber of her being trembled with trepidation. With trembling hands, she gathered the ledger and retraced her steps through the mansion. Malcolm's figure lingered at the threshold of the chamber, his eyes imploring her to remember every word of his lament as she left. Outside, the storm that had been gathering over the moor finally broke, unleashing torrents of rain that battered the mansion's ancient stone. Marion took refuge on the front lawn, huddled beneath a withered oak, while her thoughts raced. In her notebook, she meticulously documented every detail: the whispered dialogue, the spectral apparitions, the rituals of sorrow, and the desperate plea for absolution. The night's revelations were etched into her memory as indelible as the scars on the mansion's walls. In the weeks and months that followed, Marion's investigation grew into an obsession. She delved into archives, interviewed distant relatives, and scoured forgotten records. Slowly, the full tapestry of the Avermont tragedy emerged, a tale of unbridled ambition, forbidden magic, betrayal, and ultimately, a haunting that had defied death itself. Every detail, no matter how painful, was recorded in her writings, and soon her work became both a chronicle of a family's demise and a requiem for restless souls. The day eventually came when Marion returned to Avermont House with a plan. Determined to honor Malcolm's plea and free the tormented spirits from their eternal imprisonment, she re-entered the mansion alone on a rain-soaked midnight. Clutching the ledger and her notebook like sacred relics, she ascended once more to the Chamber of Secrets. The ancient room, lit only by the flicker of a single candle, greeted her with a heavy silence. The ledger lay open on the pedestal, its pages now blank, as though waiting for her to inscribe a final chapter. Drawing a deep breath, Marion began to recite aloud the incantations that she had painstakingly pieced together from historical fragments and whispered lore. Her voice, trembling at first, grew in strength and clarity, echoing through the vaulted ceiling and down the twisting corridors. Outside, the thunder roared, shaking the very foundations of Avermont House. As she spoke, tears streamed down her face, not solely of fear, but of deep, cathartic sorrow for the lives lost and the love betrayed. In that moment, the mansion seemed to tremble with anticipation, the anguished souls listening intently. A sudden gust of wind extinguished the candle, plunging the room into darkness. Marion's words were carried on the edge of oblivion until, one by one, soft lights flickered into existence. In the gloom, spectral figures emerged from the corners of the chamber, ghostly visages of Evelyn, Malcolm, and countless others who had suffered within these cursed halls. They moved slowly, their eyes now less haunted, as if they sensed that redemption had come. A murmur of gratitude rose like a benediction, mingling with the sound of the storm. In a final heartrending moment, Marion inscribed a last line in her notebook, a line that encapsulated the weight of every regret, every sorrow, and every hope that had been poured into the night. With that, a shimmering glow enveloped the chamber. The ledger's pages filled with a gentle luminescent script, a testament to forgiveness and release. The trapped spirits, now bathed in a cleansing light, began to fade, their burdens lifted by the act of remembrance and absolution. As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, Avermont House exhaled a long-held sigh, its oppressive gloom softening into an ethereal calm. Marion stood in the empty chamber, her heart heavy, yet strangely buoyed by the knowledge that the lost had finally been heard, and that their tragic tale had found its redemption in truth. In the days that followed, her published account stirred the hearts of many. The story of Avermont House, though steeped in horror and despair, became a poignant reminder that even in the darkest of legacies, the light of remembrance and forgiveness can set souls free. And though the mansion still stood on the moor, its broken windows and weathered stone a silent testament to its tortured past, a quiet peace now resided within its walls.
Story number 8.
In the depths of an autumn night, when the air grew bitter and the moon hid its face, a solitary farmhouse stood at the edge of an ancient, sprawling cornfield. The dilapidated structure had once been the pride of the Ashgrove family, but decades of neglect had transformed it into a crumbling relic, a place where every creak and whisper of wind carried the weight of sorrow and secrets. Local lore claimed the farmhouse was cursed, its walls echoing the anguished cries of those who had suffered unspeakable fates. Tonight, under a sky shrouded in storm clouds, the farmhouse awaited a new visitor. Eleanor Frost, a writer known for her penetrating explorations of the macabre, had arrived in the rural county to research forgotten histories. As the tires of her battered sedan crunched over the gravel drive, she recalled the rumors she'd heard, tales of family feuds, mysterious disappearances, and a massacre that occurred on a chilly October night many years ago. A palpable dread had hung over the property ever since, and now, driven by equal measures of curiosity and dread, Eleanor stepped out into the overwhelming darkness. The farmhouse loomed before her with a silent menace. Ivy strangled its decaying stone walls. Broken windows stared like empty sockets into the night. Eleanor's only companion was the beam of her flashlight slicing through the inky void. Each step on the creaking porch felt like trespassing on ancient graves. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she turned the heavy door, which groaned in protest, a sound that seemed to merge with the distant howl of an unseen creature. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with stagnant air and a pungent mix of mildew and decay. Shadows wavered and merged into monstrous shapes at the flicker of her light. Along the passageway, portraits of grim-faced ancestors lined the walls. Their eyes, though painted, were so vivid they seemed to harbor secrets too terrible to share. One portrait in particular, a gaunt, somber man with eyes of such penetrating sorrow that Eleanor almost felt as if he recognized her, seemed to follow her every step. Eleanor began her investigation in what appeared to be the main living area. The furniture lay overturned and draped in dusty, moth-eaten sheets, broken remnants of a once opulent past scattered like fallen leaves. A large, ornate mirror hung crookedly above a grand fireplace. Its surface was marred by age and sorrow, yet something within its reflection caught Eleanor's eye. For a moment, as she passed by, she saw not her own face, but the faint outline of a woman in a tattered dress, her expression one of despair and silent accusation. Startled, Eleanor stopped short and peered closely into the mirror, but the image dissolved into a ripple of darkness as quickly as it had appeared. A low, rhythmic thumping soon echoed through the corridors, something dragging against the floorboards. Gathering her courage, Eleanor followed the sound down a narrow hallway that led to a side room. The door to the room was slightly ajar, and, as she pushed it open, a chill swept across her body. Within the room, an old phonograph sat atop a dusty cabinet. Its horn was chipped, and a record lay at its base. The sound of the thumping ceased, as if the device had just finished a macabre performance, leaving only a heavy silence in its wake. Eleanor hesitated before speaking. "Hello? Is anyone there?" Her voice bounced off the decaying walls, unanswered. Yet, just as she began to wonder if her own imagination was betraying her, the phonograph sprang to life. A needle lifted itself and then settled on a track, setting off a haunting melody that was strangely familiar. A lullaby, warped and slowed as if sung by the dead. Each note resonated with melancholy, entwining with the very fibers of the farmhouse. Tears glinted in her eyes as the tune sank into her bones, and she realized that the sound was meant as a summons rather than a greeting. Drawn inexorably toward the source of the music, Eleanor made her way further into the house until she reached a narrow staircase leading down to what she believed must be a cellar. The steps were worn and unstable, and each one produced a creaking lament under her weight. As the murky darkness swallowed her, the lullaby grew louder, interlaced with faint, desperate whispers that seemed to come from every corner of the cellar. At the bottom, the beam of her flashlight revealed a cavernous space, an underground archive of forgotten memorabilia. Piles of faded photographs, brittle letters, and relics in tarnished frames lay scattered among broken crates. In one dim corner, a small cot was tucked against a damp stone wall, and beside it an antique rocking chair moved imperceptibly back and forth. The sound of the chair's creaking was hypnotic, a slow, rhythmic rocking as if it were cradling the ghost of a once-beloved child. It was then that she heard the whisper clearly, "Why did you leave me?" The voice was soft yet laden with sorrow, and it seemed to emanate from the rocking chair itself. Eleanor's heart raced as she approached. The whisper repeated, trembling with grief, "I never meant to abandon you." It was a voice filled with remorse and eternal longing. Unable to resist, she reached out to touch the worn wood of the chair. The moment her fingertips brushed its surface, a torrent of images flooded her mind. Visions of a young girl laughing in a sunlit orchard, quickly replaced by a darker scene. A fire ravaging the farmhouse, screams slicing through the night, and a mother's anguished cry that splintered Eleanor's sanity. Shaken, she staggered back, her mind reeling with fragmented memories not her own. It was as if the house was trying to force its painful history into her present, compelling her to witness the tragedy that had cursed the walls for generations. As she tried to steady herself, the whispers coalesced into a single, chilling command. "Remember our pain. Let it be known." Eleanor knew she had stumbled upon something far more profound than idle ghost stories. These were the tortured souls of those trapped in a cycle of despair, bound to the house by unfinished business and unhealed wounds. With trembling determination, she flipped through a battered journal she'd found among the debris. The journal belonged to a long-forgotten inhabitant, a woman named Beatrice Ashgrove. Her entries were filled with confessions of guilt, sorrow, and a desperate desire to atone for a betrayal that had doomed her family. One entry, scrawled hastily in a desperate hand, read, "I have cursed these halls with my regret. The night of the fire was the end and the beginning, a moment when our fates were sealed. If only someone could bear witness to our sorrow, perhaps then we might be freed." The words resonated with Eleanor, echoing the demands of the unseen voices around her. Determined to uncover the full story, she gathered her courage and retraced her steps back up the staircase. With every creak of the old wood and every distant, echoing cry of despair, the mansion bled its past into her memory. In the upper corridor, Eleanor encountered a door that was different from the others. A heavy, iron-bound door with elaborate carvings of anguished figures entwined with thorns. An inexplicable compulsion drove her to open it, and she found herself face to face with a small, private chapel that had once served the Ashgrove family. Now it lay in ruin, its pews overturned and its altar fractured. Candles, long extinguished, still clung to the surfaces, their holders dust-laden and cold. At the center of the altar was an intricately carved box sealed with rust and time. With reverence and terror mingling in her heart, Eleanor knelt before it and whispered, "What secret do you keep?" As if stirred by her plea, the box trembled and slowly creaked open. Inside lay a handful of faded photographs, a lock of hair, and a small scrap of fabric, items too personal to be forgotten. Beneath these, wrapped in brittle paper, was a letter addressed simply to the one who remembers. Eleanor unfolded it with care, her eyes scanning the spidery script. "My dearest child of sorrow, by the fire's light our sins were kindled, and in the darkness our souls were chained. I beg you, remember us, not as horrors in the night, but as we once were, full of life before despair devoured us. Only through remembrance can the curse be lifted. Tell our tale with compassion, and we shall find rest." The letter's final words sent a shiver down her spine. "Our redemption lies in your truth." At that moment, the spectral energies in the chapel swirled with a newfound intensity. The voices, now clear and insistent, murmured in unison, "Tell us, remember us." Suddenly, the grand silence was shattered by a piercing cry that reverberated throughout the farmhouse. Eleanor felt an icy hand brush against her shoulder, and she spun around to see the silhouette of a man standing at the doorway. A figure draped in darkness, his eyes burning with eternal torment. "Leave this place," he growled, voice trembling with both anger and despair, "or be consumed by our legacy." Eleanor's voice, though trembling, held firm resolve. "No, I will not abandon you." The man's expression wavered, torn between fury and sadness. "I was once a guardian of this house, and now I too am chained by regret. I warn you, the truth you seek will demand a sacrifice. Our anguish is heavy, and the price of remembering may be your very soul." The warning hung in the air like a curse. Eleanor took a cautious step forward. "I have come to bear witness. If my burden can bring you peace, then I accept it." The ghostly guardian's eyes glimmered with an almost imperceptible hope before receding into the shadows, leaving her with one final, whispered plea. "Then free us, or be lost with us." The storm outside had gathered force now, battering the farmhouse with lashing rain and howling winds. With trembling hands, Eleanor took her notebook and began to write. A careful, deliberate chronicle of every whispered sorrow, every trembling regret, and every lost life that had seeped into the very walls of Avermont House. In the flickering candlelight of the ruined chapel, she recited the journal entries and the letter, weaving them together into a narrative that was both terrifying and achingly human. As she wrote, the house seemed to respond. The air shifted, and soft lights appeared in the corners of the room, spectral figures, faces etched with sorrow and relief. They gathered silently around her, watching as their memories were given voice and form. For hours that stretched into an agonizing eternity, Eleanor labored, her pen scratching across the pages until every moment of despair was recorded, every untold story finally spoken aloud. Outside, the storm began to subside, replaced by a spectral stillness as if the night itself had exhaled after a long, dark breath. In that quiet, the ghostly whispers turned into gentle sighs of gratitude, and one by one the apparitions faded into nothingness, freed by the balm of remembrance. Exhausted yet resolute, Eleanor closed her notebook as the first hints of dawn crept through the warped glass of a broken window. The oppressive curse that had clung to Avermont House seemed to lift, replaced by a solemn peace. Though the scars of sorrow remained etched in its decaying stone, the legacy of the Ashgrove family was no longer a torment to be borne in silence. Instead, their truth had been told, a narrative of love, betrayal, despair, and ultimately redemption through the act of remembrance. Stepping back out into the pale light of day, Eleanor felt the weight of her own spirit forever altered by the horrors she had witnessed and the souls she had helped liberate. She knew that her written word would carry their story into the world, ensuring that the tragedy of Avermont House would never be forgotten, and that in telling their tale, perhaps others might find the courage to confront their own hidden sorrows. Even as she drove away from the silent mansion, the farmhouse remained, an enduring relic of a lost past, its ghostly inhabitants now at peace, their eternal vigil finally ended by the compassion of one who dared to remember.
Story number 9.
In the heart of a forsaken woodland where even the moonlight struggled to pierce the oppressive gloom, a crumbling orphanage stood shrouded by a choking tangle of briars and decaying trees. Locals in the nearest town, a secluded village that had long forsaken the cursed grounds, spoke in hushed tones of the place known only as Blackwood Asylum, though no orphanage had ever been run that way by design. Over time, the name had become intertwined with whispers of relentless sorrow, inexplicable disappearances, and voices that pleaded in the dead of night. Rowan Finch, a tenacious documentarian whose career had been built on exploring forgotten tragedies, arrived one bleak evening, determined to uncover the truth behind Blackwood Asylum's tormented legacy. Drawn by a mixture of morbid curiosity and a sense of justice for lost souls, Rowan left behind the safe glow of his apartment and drove into the tangled maze of dirt roads and fog that heralded the orphanage's domain. When his headlights first fell upon the imposing facade of the building, Rowan's breath caught in his throat. The structure, built in a style more suited to a medieval castle than a home for children, stood with sagging turrets and broken stained glass windows that bled spectral colors under the dying light. Vines coiled around its walls like desperate fingers trying to reclaim a bygone era. It was clear that the orphanage had not seen a living soul in decades. The heavy wrought iron gate hung off its hinges, creaking eerily as Rowan pushed it aside. His pulse drummed in his ears as he stepped onto the overgrown path leading to the entrance. Every rustle in the underbrush, every moan of the wind through skeletal trees, whispered promises of the horrors that lay within. With a trembling hand, he raised his flashlight and pressed forward into the gloom. Inside, the corridor was a desolate corridor of peeling wallpaper and rusted metal fixtures. The echo of his footsteps mingled with a distant sound that might have been the drip of water, or perhaps something else entirely. With each measured step, Rowan felt as if he were intruding on memories too painful to forget. Faded photographs of unknown children adorned the walls in cracked frames, their eyes forever frozen in expressions of quiet terror and longing. Names, once meant to offer solace in anonymity, were scrawled in time-worn ink. Alice, Edward, Margaret. A sudden persistent rustling from behind a heavy creaking door startled Rowan. He froze, holding his breath as the sound grew louder, a scraping noise that reverberated down the length of the hall. "Hello," he called, his voice bouncing off cold stone walls. No answer came, save for the oppressive hush that deepened his isolation. He approached the door and, with a cautious tug, swung it open. Beyond lay a large common room, its high ceiling lost to darkness. Broken furniture lay strewn about, while the remnants of children's toys, the worn edges of a ragged teddy bear, a single wooden block bearing the number 7, hinted at lives filled with innocence now long extinguished. As Rowan's light swept across the room, it landed on a dusty stage set at one end, complete with a cracked curtain and a solitary microphone that looked as though it had once amplified voices full of hope and mirth. Then came the first clear words, as if drawn from the ether. "Why have you returned?" The voice was plaintive and weary, echoing from behind the stage. Rowan's heart hammered in his chest. I'm here to understand," he stammered, half pleading, half demanding an explanation. "Understand? You seek only to disturb our rest," replied the voice, now tinged with anguish. Rowan edged closer, his flashlight trembling as it illuminated the shadow behind the stage, A silhouette of a small girl, her face partially hidden by a mop of unkempt hair, eyes large and sorrowful. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the sound fragile as a dying breath, "but we cannot be set free until you remember us all." Chilled by the intensity of the encounter, Rowan's rational mind clashed with the supernatural veracity of her plea. The girl's spectral form flickered like a badly tuned projection, and behind her, more shapes shifted into existence. A boy with a ghostly pallor clutching a faded doll, a young woman with forlorn eyes raised in silent accusation, and an older man, his face lined with despair, whose presence emanated the crushing weight of unresolved guilt. Rowan began recording with his handheld camera, desperate to capture every detail, every tortured expression. "Who are you?" he demanded softly, though his voice was nearly lost in the swirl of spectral lamentations. A chorus of whispers answered in unison, voices of children and adults interlaced in a mournful harmony that spanned generations. They spoke of a terrible night, a fire that had scarred the orphanage, an act of negligence or perhaps malicious intent. The flames had swept through the corridors with a fury that consumed hope and left only devastation in its wake. Many had perished that night, their cries echoing endlessly in the halls of Blackwood. Survivors, it was said, were few, and those who remained were bound by terror to the place where the tragedy had unfolded. Over time, the orphanage had become a mausoleum, a repository for the darkest remnants of human neglect and sorrow. Compelled by the depth of their despair, Rowan vowed to piece together their fragmented stories. Over the coming hours, and what seemed like days as time lost meaning in the abandoned edifice, he roamed the labyrinthine corridors, each room a repository of lost memories. In one chamber, he discovered an old scrapbook hidden beneath a rotted floorboard. The pages were filled with scribbled drawings, uneven handwriting, and photographs of smiling children whose eyes now held a ghostly sadness. The caption on one page read, "We promised to be together forever," a promise that had been eternally broken. In another room, Rowan encountered a decrepit record player and a stack of vinyl records. As he delicately set the needle upon one record, a haunting melody began to play, a lullaby so plaintive it seemed to carry the weight of every tear that had ever been shed within these walls. The melody stirred memories of forgotten laughter, of games played in happier times, and yet it was underscored by an all-encompassing sorrow. In that moment, images flooded his mind, a flicker of light amid darkness, a rush of smoky orange flames consuming a building, and the desperate faces of those trapped inside. Throughout his exploration, the environment itself seemed to morph between eras, a surreal interplay of past and present. Hallways that had once been meticulously maintained were now crumbling relics of neglect, and as Rowan passed by, the faded voices of the dead rose in a spectral crescendo. They spoke of betrayal. One caretaker, whose name Rowan learned was Harold Mason, had been accused of deliberately neglecting the children. Some whispered that it had been a twisted act of vengeance by someone consumed by hatred, while others claimed that the tragedy was nothing more than the manifestation of dark forces that had taken root in Blackwood's very soil. Late one night, in a chamber hidden behind a false wall near the cellar, Rowan uncovered a series of journals bound in brittle leather. These journals, written by Harold Mason himself, detailed a slow descent into madness. Harold described his growing paranoia, the voices that taunted him from shadowed corners, and his desperate attempts to exorcise the malevolence that crept ever closer. In one particularly harrowing entry, he wrote, "I fear the souls of these poor children wander these halls, seeking retribution. I feel their eyes upon me, their whispered curses echoing in every shattered fragment of my mind. Should I not pray for forgiveness, or am I doomed to walk with these ghosts forever?" As Rowan read, the temperature in the room plummeted, and a cold wind snaked through the space. The journal's pages fluttered as if animated by a spectral hand. Then he heard a familiar voice behind him, a quiet, trembling voice that repeated, "Remember us, remember our pain." Rowan spun around, but he found no one there save for the oppressive darkness. Still, the echo of those desperate words clung to him like a shroud. Determined not to succumb to fear, Rowan made his way to the heart of the building, the chapel. Hidden behind layers of rotted wood and cobwebbed drapery, the chapel was a relic of faith now defiled by tragedy. Dust-covered pews lined the walls, and a once grand altar was smeared with soot and desperate inscriptions. Upon the altar lay a decaying crucifix, and near it a mosaic depicting angels weeping indiscernible tears. Here the voices grew louder, as if the orphanage's suffering had converged in this sacred space. Rowan could almost see, in the dim light, the spectral figures of children kneeling in silent prayer, their faces twisted with eternal grief. In the quiet that followed, a single authoritative whisper broke the chorus. Who will carry our truth into the world? It was not a plea, but a command, a challenge issued from the void by the collective spirit of every lost soul in Blackwood. Though every fiber in his body urged him to flee, Rowan's resolve crystallized. His own life had been defined by the pursuit of truth, even at the cost of his sanity. I will remember, he declared, his voice echoing against the cold stone. I promise to tell your story. At that moment, as though in answer to his vow, a soft luminescence began to permeate the chapel. The spectral figures gathered before him, their eyes reflecting both sorrow and a newfound hope. They moved in a slow, rhythmic dance, a final farewell to the cursed night that had imprisoned them. In one graceful, almost imperceptible gesture, the ghost of a little girl placed a hand upon his shoulder. Her touch was barely there, yet it seared itself into his memory, a silent benediction from beyond the grave. The hours stretched and merged as Rowan recorded every detail, every nuance of the orphanage's tragic legacy. He spent that night writing feverishly in his battered notebook, his pen scratching furiously to capture the whispers of the damned. Outside, the storm raged in a symphony of rain and wind, as if nature itself mourned the countless souls lost within Blackwood Asylum. With each stroke of his pen, he felt the oppressive curse loosening, replaced by a sense of solemn duty and cathartic release. At dawn, the first pale tendrils of sunlight reached through broken windows, gently dissolving the shadows that had long ruled the halls. The spectral figures faded gradually into the light, their tormented eyes softening into quiet acceptance. Rowan stepped outside, his heart burdened yet resolute. He had borne witness to a horror beyond mortal comprehension, yet he had also inherited a sacred responsibility, one that demanded that the truth be shared so that the memories of those lost might finally be honored. Over the following weeks, Rowan's documented account of Blackwood Asylum spread throughout the nearby village and beyond. People came to see the dilapidated orphanage not only as a monument of unspeakable horror, but also as a hallowed ground where lost souls had finally been recognized. His book, a careful blend of first-hand narrative and the whispered memories of the dead, became a quiet beacon to those who had suffered injustice or felt that their own voices had been lost in time. Yet even as his work garnered praise for its empathy and raw honesty, Rowan could not escape the lingering chill that haunted his every moment. In the solitude of his small apartment, he would awake in the night to the soft echoes of a child's laughter or the plaintive call of "Remember us" drifting through his open window. It was as though the orphanage, though freed from its mortal prison, had tethered its legacy to him. A constant, spectral reminder that some tragedies can never fully vanish, but must be carried within the hearts of those brave enough to recall them. And so, with each recounted memory and every retelling of Blackwood's sorrowful history, the voices of the forgotten were echoed into eternity, a timeless dirge of loss, vengeance, and finally, a fragile hope for redemption. In the end, the orphanage had transformed from a cursed monument of despair into a testament that even the darkest past could be illuminated by the compassion of a soul determined to remember.
Story number 10.
The fog was so thick that night it seemed to swallow every trace of the moon. It lay heavy over the desolate expanse of moorland near the remote village of Grindle's Hollow, a place whose name few outside the county dared utter after dark. At the heart of the mist-shrouded moor stood an ancient manor known only as Ashbury House, its once regal stone facade now marred by centuries of decay and neglect. Local lore insisted that the manor harbored secrets too terrible for daylight, and that its corridors echoed with sorrow and malignant energy. A curse, some said, wrought long ago by a vengeful spirit. Jonas Pike, a somber yet determined historian with a penchant for unraveling bitter truths, arrived in Grindle's Hollow on a dreary autumn afternoon. Jonas had spent years combing through dusty records and forbidden manuscripts, piecing together a narrative that connected a series of unexplained disappearances to Ashbury House. Although most dismissed these occurrences as superstition and the ramblings of an overactive imagination, Jonas's own family had been irrevocably touched by the manor's dark legacy. Now, with trembling resolve and a heart heavy with personal loss, he drove the winding country road toward the looming silhouette of the manor. Upon his arrival, the manor's grim presence was unmistakable. Gnarled trees huddled around the property as if protecting its dreadful secrets, and the rusted iron gate creaked open at his approach, welcoming him like the grasp of a skeletal hand. Jonas could feel the hair on his neck bristle as he stepped through the gate. The air was thick with a stale chill, and the faint whisper of voices he couldn't quite decipher. Clutching a leather-bound journal in which he had painstakingly noted every fragment of evidence, he pushed open the heavy oak door, which moaned in protest as if lamenting its own fate. Inside Ashbury House was an echo of a once grand estate. Dust-covered chandeliers swung lightly from the high ceilings, casting shadows that danced along decaying wallpaper. The grand foyer opened to a cavernous hall lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow his every cautious step. One portrait in particular, an austere woman with ice-blue eyes and a sorrow that touched the very soul, stopped Jonas in his tracks. Her painted expression was one of desperate pleading, as though she sought redemption for sins long past. A single word was scrawled in the bottom corner of the frame in faded ink: Moria. Jonas's heart stuttered. Moria had been mentioned in the old family records as the dark force blamed for a bitter curse that fell on the Ashbury line. He moved cautiously through the mansion, the beam of his flashlight carving narrow paths through the darkness. Each step on the creaking floorboards stirred echoes from eras long gone. He entered a vast library where rows upon rows of ancient tomes slumbered under layers of dust. Here, Jonas hoped to find records that would illuminate the manor's haunted past. His fingers traced the spines of books and papers until he discovered a leather-bound ledger wedged behind a shelf, a ledger detailing cryptic entries dated back to the late 1700s. The pages spoke of sorrowful rituals, forbidden pacts, and a mysterious figure known only as Moria, who was said to be both muse and malediction. A sudden clatter shattered the silence. Jonas's pulse quickened as he froze in the gloom. The sound had come from the direction of the grand staircase. Slowly, he approached the sweeping staircase that led to the upper floor, where the air felt distinctly colder. As he ascended, he heard faint, indecipherable murmurs as if a conversation unfolded just behind a closed door. Steeling his nerves, Jonas pressed his ear against the wooden barrier. Though the words were muffled, the tone carried unmistakable despair and chilling anger. The voice whispered, "You have disturbed our rest," and then fell silent. Startled, Jonas pulled back, his mind racing with thoughts of the damned souls that might have been condemned to linger within these walls. The memory of his own family's tragedy, his sister's disappearance, the inexplicable events that led to his father's untimely end, merged with the spectral evidence in his journal, urging him to delve deeper. He decided to search for a place referred to in the ledger, a small, hidden room known as the Crypt of Regret. Jonas's search led him down a narrow corridor to a door crudely marked with symbols that looked almost ancient in origin. The heavy door was secured with a rusted chain that creaked ominously as he unfastened it. Beyond the door lay a cramped, subterranean chamber lit by the flickering light of a solitary lantern. The air was damp and smelled of decay. Against the far wall rested a stone sarcophagus adorned with unsettling etchings. It bore the unmistakable sign of the curse. Jonas's fingers brushed over the carved runes, and in that moment he felt a chill like the whisper of a ghost. A sudden, piercing cry shattered the silence. It came from the far end of the crypt, a sound so raw and desperate that it froze Jonas in place. "Help me," the voice cried, echoing off the cold stone walls. Jonas jumped back, nearly dropping his lantern. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice quavering. For several long, agonizing seconds, only the sound of his own pounding heart filled the chamber. Then, from behind a partially collapsed wall, a figure emerged. A gaunt, spectral woman in tattered garments whose eyes shone with an unearthly light. "I am Moria," she said, her voice wavering between sorrow and fury. "I was betrayed and condemned. My family, my people, all sacrificed by those who craved power above all else." Her gaze bore into Jonas as if she could see the weight of his own burdens mirrored in his soul. "You seek the truth, do you not? You wish to unbind the chains that shackle this house and its cursed legacy." Jonas swallowed hard. I only want to know what happened, he stammered. I want to understand the tragedy that has haunted my family for generations. Moria's spectral form seemed to flicker with a mix of empathy and a fierce hunger for retribution. Then follow my tale, she whispered, motioning for him to come closer. With a deep, almost resigned sigh, she began her story, a narrative that transcended time and sanity. Moria revealed that she had once been the beloved matriarch of the Ashbury estate, a woman revered for her compassion and grace. But greed, cruelty, and the lust for forbidden power had driven a bitter wedge among her kin. A terrible conspiracy had been hatched by those closest to her, resulting in a catastrophic fire that had claimed countless innocent lives. In the dying moments of that fateful night, Moria had been forced to bind the souls of the fallen to the manor, ensuring that their anguish would never depart, a curse designed to exact endless torment upon the betrayers and to imprison the souls of the virtuous as a constant reminder of their suffering. As Moria spoke, the stone walls of the crypt seemed to pulsate in time with the cadence of her tale. Jonas could feel the palpable sorrow in every word, the unrelenting bitterness in every pause. They used dark ritual, she continued, her tone trembling with remembered pain, to trap the light of our lives and turn it into a beacon of endless despair. I, once a mother, a wife, and a guardian of hope, became the vessel for all our curses, forced to watch as my loved one's cries echoed ceaselessly through these halls. Tears glistened in Jonas's eyes as he listened, his voice a mere whisper. How can this be undone? Moria's eyes shimmered, and for a moment the specter of determination replaced her sorrowful resignation. The curse can be broken only by an act of genuine atonement, a selfless sacrifice to restore that which was lost. The blood of an heir, willingly given in sincere repentance, may set these tormented souls free. But such a ritual demands more than mere ritualistic fervor. It requires acknowledging the sins committed, confronting the darkest aspects of one's own soul, and embracing the pain of truth. Jonas felt the gravity of her words resonating deep within him. He had spent his life pursuing the truth about his family's fate. Now he stood on the precipice of being faced with the darkest secret of his lineage. I never imagined, he began, his voice faltering as the implications sank in. I never imagined that the curse was intertwined with my own bloodline. Moria's spectral form wavered in the dim light, and she extended a frail, ghostly hand toward him. The answers you seek lie in the heart of Ashbury House itself, in the room where the final betrayal occurred. There you must confront the relic of our curse, a shard of obsidian with a power forged in the agony of our fall. Only by bearing witness to that horror and accepting your role in the unfolding fate can the cycle be broken. Determined yet trembling, Jonas left the crypt with Moria's parting words echoing in his mind. He roamed the endless corridors of the manor, the oppressive silence broken only by the whispers of the past. In a forgotten wing of the house, behind a door barred by twisted iron filigree, he discovered the chamber where the tragic fire had taken place. The room was choked with the residue of smoke and ashes, and in the center lay a shattered mirror whose fractured surface shimmered with an otherworldly luster. Embedded within its splintered shards was a singular piece of obsidian, dark as a starless night, pulsing faintly with a malignant energy. As Jonas approached, the very air seemed to thicken with the cries of the damned. The relic radiated an aura that was at once mesmerizing and repulsive, a silent witness to a past drenched in sorrow and betrayal. With trembling hands, he reached out and touched the obsidian shard. In that instant, a searing pain shot through him, and his senses were inundated with visions of that dreadful night, the roaring flames, the screams of the innocent, the cold, uncaring eyes of those who had perpetrated the unthinkable. The images seared themselves into his mind with a force that threatened to shatter his sanity. A voice, laden with the anguish of countless souls, whispered directly into his mind, "Your blood holds the key. If you are prepared to suffer for the truth, the curse may be undone." With every fiber of his being racked by pain and regret, Jonas understood that he was being offered a chance, a final test of his willingness to atone for the sins of a long-forgotten era. Struggling to remain conscious, Jonas withdrew his hand, and the shard's dark glow dimmed slightly, as if acknowledging his resolve. With a final, shuddering breath, he vowed to carry out what must be done, even if it meant sacrificing himself for the liberation of the souls trapped within Ashbury House. He scrawled his final notes in his journal, detailing every tortured memory, Every spectral warning and the grim revelation that his own family's fate was irrevocably entwined with the curse. In the days that followed, word of Jonas Pike's exploration spread quietly through Grindle's Hollow. His account, interlaced with personal tragedy and raw, unyielding courage, stirred a mix of fear and awe among the locals. Though his ultimate fate remained uncertain, many believed that by willingly facing the monstrous legacy of his lineage, Jonas had sparked a small but significant rebellion against the insidious power that had haunted the manor for centuries. And so, even as Ashbury House continued to stand in its solitary despair on the windswept moor, a subtle change began to manifest. Some nights, witnesses reported that a warm, almost imperceptible glow seeped from its broken windows, a sign perhaps that the tormented souls within were finally finding solace in the truth. In hushed tones, the villagers whispered that the curse was losing its grip, that the weight of centuries of sorrow was gradually being lifted by the sacrifice of one who dared to remember and repent. Yet the darkness would never vanish entirely. Its echoes lingered in every shadow, a perpetual reminder that in the realm of human frailty and guilt, some horrors simply endure. And in the silent recesses of Ashbury House, where the past mingled with the present in an unending dirge of despair and reluctant hope, the story of Jonas Pike and the promise he had etched into the cursed stone would remain a chilling testament to the cost of truth.